Hey guys, tonight we step into the steamy haze of ancient Rome, not to witness a gladiator battle or hear Cicero rant, but to eavesdrop on the real heart of Roman society, the public baths. You walk through a stone archway thick with humidity and the faint scent of olive oil. Marble floors gleam underfoot. Steam curls from a nearby doorway. You hear laughter, slapping sandals murmurs in Latin. There's a distant splash, a sneeze, and the rhythmic slap of water being stirred in long stone pools. This is not just a bathhouse. It's Rome's gym barbershop snack bar social club, and yes, even a political forum all under one tiled roof. But here's the twist. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes. Between the unspoken rules, the casual nudity, the awkward hierarchies, and some rather unappetizing hygiene hacks, let's just say modern spa etiquette would be horrified. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, while we're soaking together, in the past, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I love knowing who's drifting off where. Now dim. The lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, following a loose line of bathgoers. Wealthy men with rings and tunics pulled halfway up. A few soldiers off duty still smelling faintly of leather and sweat. And a child who, judging by the splash of mud on his calves, hasn't even been pretending to avoid puddles. You're in the frigidarium, the cold room, but it's warm by modern standards. You pass through a stone archway flanked by marble columns, the air gradually thickening with mist and heat. Slaves dart around like well-trained shadows. One offers you a wooden bucket for your belongings. Another gestures to a bench where you can undress. There's no real privacy. That was never the point. In fact, Romans prided themselves on the normalcy of it all. Nakedness here is just another toga to hang up for a while. Some bathhouses, like the baths of Caracalla, could hold over 1,500 people at once. The walls, towering frescoes. The ceilings, arched vaults 20 feet high, humming with echoing conversation. And everywhere the glint of mosaics underfoot. Neptune dolphins writhing sea monsters. Even the floors want to remind you that bathing is divine. You ease toward the tepidarium, the warm room where heat begins to creep into your bones. Unlike modern spas, the heat here comes from underfoot. Roman engineers were obsessed with hot air. Through a system called the hypocaust furnaces beneath the floors, sent warm air through hollow bricks, turning the entire room into a radiant sauna-like cocoon. Clever, absolutely. Energy, efficient, not remotely. And yet, despite the grandeur, there's something oddly utilitarian. You get the sense that this isn't a luxury, but a daily ritual, which in many ways it was. Even the poorer citizens could access baths for a nominal fee, sometimes free, thanks to wealthy sponsors eager for political brownie points. Public bathing wasn't optional, it was expected. One man sits on a stone ledge oiling his arms methodically. Another uses a curved metal tool, a strigil, to scrape sweat and grime from his back. You'll get your turn soon. There's a strange intimacy in all this, a shared understanding that bodies are just bodies. Fat, thin, scarred, stooped, muscled, none of it matters once the steam hits your face. Of course, not everyone is relaxed. You notice a younger man keeping distance from a group of senators, loudly debating grain taxes. Another older fellow is carefully avoiding the gaze of a particularly flirtatious bath slave. Social hierarchies, it turns out, don't dissolve in steam. they just fog up a little. Historians still argue whether this version of Roman life was truly egalitarian or just performatively so. Did the poor really feel comfortable bathing next to the rich? Or were these massive communal spaces simply a reminder of how visible and judged everyone was? Even as you sit on the warm bench, you realize the benches themselves are a kind of theater. Eyes wander, conversations bloom, alliances are formed, and reputations adjusted, all while half naked and slick with oil. And then you catch a glimpse of something unexpected, a mosaic tucked into a side alcove. It's not a god or myth, it's a rat, gleaming beady-eyed scuttling across a vine. A subtle joke, a warning. No one seems to notice, but it makes you wonder. What else hides beneath all this polished marble? Before you shuffle deeper into the mist, consider this. What if your next bathmate was your rival, your boss, or your ex? What if slipping into hot water meant slipping into a scene of social chess, complete with glances, rumors, and silent power plays? And what if bathing wasn't just about cleaning up, but about showing off? You cross from the tepidarium into the warmer air of the caldarium, the hot room. The doorway exhales a deep wave of heat enough to make you pause. Inside, the ceiling curves like an upside-down bowl, its center blackened from centuries of steam and smoke. The air feels heavy on your chest. Not suffocating, but definitely persuasive. You're sweating before you even sit down. The room is dim, but alive. Lamps flicker along the walls, and the heat lends a strange softness to the marble. Here, everyone glistens like waxed fruit. You notice a senator slouch dramatically across a bench, his ringed fingers tapping against a bronze water jug. Two older men whisper in the corner, their towels slowly sliding off their knees. And in the center, a pool the size of a generous living room steams quietly, invitingly. But make no mistake, this isn't a place of ease for everyone. The caldarium is where Roman social life goes full tilt. Every gesture matters. Where you sit, who you nod to, who you avoid. It's like navigating an invisible dinner party without a seating chart. There are no reserved signs here, but there may as well be. The wealthy and influential usually claim the warmest spots closest to the heat source. That corner by the brazier. Definitely occupied even if no one's there yet. You sidle into a safer spot. Mid-range temperature, mid-range social exposure. The seating is tiered stone steps lined along the edge of the room, each step doubling as a kind of amphitheater bench. You sit your back, immediately picking up the heat stored in the stone. The moist air curls into your nose and ears. It's like sitting inside a teapot. People talk, but they don't shout. The acoustics of the room exaggerate everything, so a laugh becomes a cackle, and a whisper carries too far. Instead, you get a symphony of soft voices, a murmur that dances between conversations. One of the more curious things here, the mixed crowd. While Roman baths generally separated men and women either by time slots or physical barriers, there are historical exceptions. Private baths, country estates, and even certain imperial spa complexes allowed co-ed bathing. And when they did well, let's just say it added layers to the social dance. Historians still argue whether these mixed sessions were scandalous or perfectly normal by Roman standards. Some sources describe moral decay, others celebrate equality and openness. The truth, as usual, probably steams somewhere in the middle. Suddenly, someone stands and moves toward the central pool. All eyes casually follow. He's fit-tanned and clearly comfortable with the attention. As he steps into the water, the steam parts theatrically around him. It's less of a bath, more of a stage entrance. That's the thing, these baths aren't just about relaxation, they're about visibility. You're not only soaking, you're being seen soaking. You're showing that you have the time, the money, and the connections to be here. And then there's the matter of posture. Leaning back, legs spread, arms draped over the bench, that says confidence status. Hunched forward, elbows on knees, glancing around, that says anxiety, outsider, maybe new money. You don't want to be new money in a room like this. Not unless you're bringing a gladiator or a senator as your plus one. A slave passes by offering chilled towels and little cakes. Yes, cakes. Tiny fig pastries wrapped in grape leaves, sweet and sticky, passed around like mints. You politely decline. Partly because you're not hungry, partly because you're worried about fig seeds in your teeth mid-conversation. To your left, a man is having his arms massaged with perfumed oil. His masseur is fast, firm, and silent like a living muscle pump. The client groans softly, part relief, part performance. There's another service, being discreetly offered, tucked behind a curtain near the brazier. You can't see who's back there, but the curtain flutters every few minutes. Some historians believe these hidden corners were where more than just massages happened. Business deals, political pacts, and favors traded without documentation. If walls could talk, Roman bathhouse walls would have gossip columns for centuries. Still, the most frequent transaction here isn't scandalous. It's information. Who's gained favor? Who's lost wealth? Which generals are returning home with too many trophies and too few soldiers? You don't need a newspaper when the caldarium has everything you need, plus eucalyptus oil. And yet, amid all this performance, the physical toll starts to show. A few men begin shifting uncomfortably. The heat, while luxurious at first, now seeps too deep. A slave offers a ladle of water, not to drink, but to splash onto the stones, creating a hiss of new steam and a brief distraction. You begin to feel it too, a pulse in your temple, the sluggish beat of your heart trying to cool you down. It's time to leave, but leaving isn't a simple matter either. You rise slowly, careful not to look too dizzy. Slipping here is not just embarrassing, it's socially damning. You make your way to the exit arch, where the air feels almost cold by comparison. And just as you step into the next chamber, a boy no older than 12 rushes past with a fresh bucket of water. He stumbles, regains balance, and disappears into the steam. A glimpse of the labor behind the luxury. A reminder, someone's always keeping the fire going. Imagine someone judging your social rank by the way you sweat, or sizing up your finances based on how many servants scrub your back. In the next chamber of Rome's famous bathhouses, the rules of engagement grow trickier, and the line between hygiene and hierarchy starts to blur in very sudsy ways. You step now into the caldarium proper. The steam is thicker, and the room smaller, almost womb-like. The walls seem to sweat with you. It's quieter here, more intimate, but not less political. The heat wraps around your body like wet wool. You feel each breath slow down almost involuntarily. A low bubbling sound comes from a sunken pool in the center, heated by underground furnaces that never sleep. Two men are already submerged up to their shoulders, chatting lazily. Not loudly, but you can hear every word. They're discussing grain shipments from Alexandria, not a thrilling subject, unless you're an empire dependent on bread and increasingly bad moods. A slave kneels beside one of them, scraping his master's back with a bronze strigil. The tool glides through a paste of oil and sweat collecting grime and dead skin. The substance flicked off lands on the floor, where another servant dutifully wipes it up with a damp cloth without flinching. It's a moment so mundane, so mechanical, that you nearly miss how ritualized it is. Romans didn't use soap, at least not as we know it. Instead, they oiled their skin, then scraped it clean. Why well oil was believed to loosen dirt and preserve skin. Also, let's be honest, it smells much nicer than the goat fat and ash soap other ancient cultures dabbled with. You're handed your own strigil and a little clay jar of oil, fragrant with lavender and thyme. A servant demonstrates the motion apply, weight then scrape downward with care. You mimic it and instantly feel a bizarre satisfaction at the ribbon of grayish goo that appears. Gross, sure, but also deeply gratifying. Scraping your own back is difficult, so you notice people helping each other. Friends, relatives, sometimes strangers, trade strigil strokes with the same casualness as borrowing a pen. It's one of the few moments in Roman daily life where touch is expected rather than negotiated. Historians still debate whether this scraping ritual was purely hygienic or had deeper social layers. Some say it was about building trust. After all, exposing your back is an act of vulnerability. Others argue it was about status. The more people willing to scrape you, the more likable or powerful you probably were. As you settle, in another detail becomes clear. The slaves doing the most intimate work, the scraping, the massaging, the water fetching, are the least seen. They blend into the corners, emerge only when summoned, yet they know every scar, every secret tattoo, every overheard whisper. A bald man with a strong build and a perpetually raised eyebrow begins a loud conversation with someone just outside the pool. His voice bounces off the walls, commanding attention. But what really draws your eye is the crowd's reaction. Some shift closer, others look away. You learn through observing that this man is a client of a powerful patron. He doesn't own land, but he owns loyalty, and that can be traded like currency here. Someone next to you offers a small cloth. You realize it's for your feet. Romans were oddly obsessed with clean feet. Bathing without scrubbing them was considered uncivilized. One source even implies that dirty heels might disqualify you from dinner invitations. Whether that's true or just snobby satire is unclear, but either way, you get scrubbing. The floor beneath you is warm, almost too warm. That's no accident. The hypocaust system isn't just for heating rooms, it makes the very stones glow with retained heat. Pipes carry steam up the walls, creating a vertical bake that's both soothing and slightly surreal. You begin to understand why this was more than just a bath. It's an experience, a performance, a chance to be enveloped by technology, by tradition, and by expectations. Suddenly there's a splash. A young man slips while trying to balance too many amphorae. Water goes everywhere. A few people laugh, others tease softly. The older gentleman being scrubbed near the splash zone sighs and lifts a single eyebrow, clearly offended that his relaxation was interrupted. The boy gathers the jugs, quickly apologizing, but the moment sticks with you. Because even here, where everyone is supposed to be equal, there are reminders that equality is conditional. The wrong slip at the wrong time, and you're someone else's punchline. You look up and spot a curious decoration above the arch, a small mosaic of Venus bathing, attended by dolphins. But there's something off. The dolphins look oddly human in the eyes, and the goddess is laughing hard. It's not reverent, it's playful. Roman baths didn't shy from humor. even divine humor. Some bathhouses included graffiti with cheeky drawings, or advice like don't trust the quiet ones in the steam. These moments suggest a place that didn't just clean the body, it cleaned the mood. A kind of national therapy. Everyone came out, wrinkled slick, and slightly more agreeable. Still, not everything is sunshine and scented oils. Roman moralists occasionally ranted about the decadence of public bathing. Some claimed men were becoming too soft, too indulgent. Others feared the mingling of classes might upend the proper order of things. Emperor Hadrian once had to ban mixed-gender bathing altogether, though many ignored it. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were about preserving dignity or just enforcing control. One surviving edict from a provincial governor lists the fine for inappropriate conduct in the baths at 5 denarii. The definition of inappropriate, however, was never clarified. You're nearly done with your oil and scrape routine when you feel a tap on your shoulder. A servant gestures toward a side door. Time to rinse off and move forward. You rise slowly, knees reminding you of how long you've been seated. You leave behind the glistening tiles, the oil pots, and the unspoken web of glances and murmurs. As you walk toward the next chamber, the air begins to cool your skin, still tingling. You feel clean? Yes, but also somehow recoded. As if the grime you scraped away wasn't just physical. Maybe that's the point. Let's play a little game. Imagine the world's busiest coffee shop. Now replace the coffee with hot water, the baristas with half-naked masseurs, and the background music with soft arguments about olive taxes. Welcome to the real social engine of ancient Rome, and maybe the world's steamiest rumor mill. You enter a wider room now, the palaestra just beyond it, visible through open columns. Sunlight slants in through high windows, catching the haze still clinging to your skin. The air is noticeably cooler, fresher, and yet the space hums louder than ever. You've emerged into the heart of what made Roman baths far more than a hygiene stop. This is where the city's pulse gets loud. The gossip chamber, the idle forum, the hallway where alliances form, romances begin, and reputations are either polished or scraped away, like bath oil sludge. Here bathers recline on wooden loungers or perch on warm benches, loosely draped in towels or tunics. Slaves fan their masters with woven reeds. A few children race through with jugs of water, shooed by adults who only pretend to mind. You spot a merchant gesturing animatedly with fig-sticky fingers, 2 toga-eyed senators listening with the flat expressions of men pretending to be less interested than they really are. What's different here? The atmosphere. The caldarium was a place to sweat. This is a place to scheme. You find an empty bench, still warm from its last occupant. Around you, conversations unfurl like scrolls. Someone nearby complains about a neighbor's grain shipment blocking their alley. Another pair discusses an upcoming festival and whether it's worth bribing the priest for better parade placement. And then you catch a strange detail. One man is whispering about a horse. Not racing, not breeding, just the horse. He knows too much, the man says. His companion nods solemnly. You pretend not to hear. Rule 1 of bathhouse eavesdropping. Always look like you're listening to something else. Bathhouses weren't just social spaces, they were networks. In a city where most people had no private office or quiet home meeting space, baths were the easiest place to find someone. It was like bumping into a coworker in the elevator, except both of you are glistening in olive oil, and one of you is chewing pickled plums. What did Romans actually talk about here? Everything. business politics, sports marriages scandals. An inscription found in Ostia lists a bathhouse as a known place to find a man who owes you money. Another refers to it as the warm wall that hears all but remembers none. Still, there were limits. One story survives of a man who brought scrolls into the bath, trying to read while he soaked. He was laughed out of the room, not because reading was foolish, but because it was trying too hard. Baths weren't for studying, they were for subtlety. You notice now that some visitors don't seem to bathe at all. They move from bench to bench, drink from clay cups, nod at the right people, and leave. Their towels stay dry. Their hair remains perfectly curled. These are the bathhouse butterflies there to be seen, not steamed. A slave appears at your side with a tray of snacks, dates, olives, tiny cheese wedges. You take a few, realizing how normal it feels to nibble on goat cheese in your bathrobe while someone argues about tax grain levies 2 feet away. And then there's the bathhouse regulars. Every complex had them. The old man who tells the same joke. The woman who always brings her own sponge. The kid who's not supposed to be there, but somehow always is. They gave each bathhouse its character. Historians still argue whether these social zones had unwritten codes, who could talk to whom, which benches belonged to which class, whether greetings required standing up. There's no surviving rule book, but mosaics and inscriptions suggest that bathhouse politics were real, if hilariously vague. You spot one particularly lively group in a corner. They're playing a game with carved dice, the Roman equivalent of a casual card game. Laughter erupts as someone loses a round and pretends to throw his towel in surrender. Small coins change hands. No one's really winning, but everyone's being watched. In the corner, near the pool, you spot a familiar figure, the man who slipped earlier. Now he's dry, relaxed, and very much part of the conversation circle. Maybe the fall wasn't a fall after all. Maybe it was just the opening act. This section of the bath complex was also where Romans read out poetry, sang songs, even delivered impromptu performances. Some bathhouses had small alcoves with built-in seats, mini auditoriums for storytelling or satire. You imagine a toga-clad performer riffing on the emperor's hairstyle while an audience chuckles politely into their towels. You pass by one of these alcoves where a young man is reciting something halfway between a love poem and a sales pitch. Her eyes like Jupiter's storms, he begins her shoulders wide as the Appian Way. His friends hoot softly, but someone in the back murmurs that his metaphors need work. Outside the arched doorway in the palaestra, a small crowd is gathering. This courtyard is usually for exercise wrestling running ball games, but today it hosts something better, a philosopher. You slip closer and listen. He's not famous, but he's loud and he's got hand gestures. He's explaining how water is the truest metaphor for the human soul shaped by pressure, always seeking lower ground and never quite clean. Some listeners nod. One yawns. Another starts mimicking the philosopher behind his back. It's all very Roman earnest ideas served with a wink. The gossip flows like the fountains here, constant recycled, occasionally refreshed. Rumors about distant legions, news from the market, stories about who showed up at which dinner party wearing the wrong colored sash. But under the surface, always there's tension. Because visibility is risky. If you're seen with the wrong person, you're suspect. If you're overheard scoffing at a senator's joke, you're marked. It's not dangerous, not exactly, but it's never neutral. You get up to stretch, wandering toward one of the tall waterspouts lining the wall. Cold water pours from the carved mouth of a lion. You splash your face, the chill a pleasant slap after all that heat. Behind you, someone mutters, "That merchant's wife came twice this week. Without him." You don't turn around. A poet once called the Roman bath a mirror of the city. It's hard to disagree. The heat brings everything to the surface: status, scandal, laughter, and ambition, all wrapped in towels and dunked in marble tubs. You sit again, just to watch. No need to talk. The bath speaks for itself. Let's zoom in on something you've probably never questioned: how clean were Roman bathers really? Spoiler: it depends on your definition of clean. What if we told you their most trusted hygiene method didn't involve water at all, and that the glistening oils had a slightly recycled reputation? You find yourself now in the frigidarium, an informal space near the exit of the warm rooms, where the final scraping and prepping takes place. It's not a room in every bathhouse, but in the larger ones, like the baths of Trajan or Caracalla, this transitional chamber was key. Think of it as the locker room without lockers, where bathers reset their bodily presentation before emerging back into the world. The first thing you notice: buckets, dozens of them, all full of milky amber-colored residue olive oil mixed with sweat skin cells and whatever grime the bathers have scraped off. And here's the kicker: this wasn't waste. It was collected, stored, sometimes sold, because to some Roman entrepreneurs, used bath oil had commercial value. Yes, really. The oil and filth concoction, called fuligo in some records, was sometimes repurposed by tanners, perfumers, or even medical charlatans who claimed it cured various ailments. A few writers mock the idea that old bath goop could have health benefits, but others list it in household remedy books. One anecdote insists that a small dab behind the ears keeps mosquitoes away. You decide not to test that theory. You take your place near a narrow bench, rubbing the last of your oil into your arms as a servant stands ready with the strigil. The tool is chilled from rinsing a thin curved blade of bronze that flexes just slightly as it's drawn across your skin. There's something ritualistic about it. The gentle pressure, the rhythmic motion, the way the oil pulls away dirt you didn't even know was there. And then the satisfying plop as the gunk hits the collection bucket. Strigils weren't just for cleaning. They were also status symbols. Some were engraved with family crests or personal mottos. Wealthy citizens might carry theirs in engraved cases like a fancy pen set. Inscriptions on tombs sometimes listed a person's favorite strigil alongside their profession. One epitaph reads, "He bathed daily, scraped deeply, and died sweetly," which is either charming or ominous, depending on your mood. You glance at a man next to you. He's got a servant working methodically down his spine and another attending to his feet. Neither says a word. This kind of attention isn't about indulgence, it's about image. In Rome, being well-oiled wasn't just personal care, it was civic duty. An unclean citizen was a disrespectful one. Still, not all oils were created equal. The everyday stuff was cold-pressed from mature olives, slightly bitter in smell, often cut with cheaper fillers. High-end oils came from the first pressing of green olives, oleum viride, and carried a fruity scent that lingered even after a full rinse. Some bathers added herbs or flower petals. Others, particularly those seeking attention, chose oils so pungent they could be identified across the room. Historians still debate how widespread perfume use was in Roman baths. Some argue it was a status flex. Others say strong scents were frowned upon, too flashy, too unnatural. Either way, Someone in this room is definitely wearing rose lavender blend, and it's making you oddly nostalgic for a bakery. While you finish your own routine, a young boy enters carrying a tray of tools, extra strigils, small clay pots of oilcloths for polishing. He sets them out like surgical instruments. His hands are steady, his face unreadable. He might be 12. He might be 15. Age is difficult to guess under this much discipline. This brings you to the strange truth of the Roman bath for every person relaxing. There are three others working: slaves, attendants, apprentices. And while bathers debate taxes and theater tickets, the invisible labor keeps everything gleaming. A few scrolls from the era reference oil boys, who were so valued by their patrons, they received tips, freedom, even inheritances. Others were sold with the bathhouses themselves, transferred like furniture, their names never recorded. You can't help wondering what this boy's life is like outside this room, or if he ever gets to bathe. There's a soft clink as your strigil is placed back into a bronze bowl. A servant offers you a cloth to pat yourself dry, not rub, just press. The Romans didn't believe in rough toweling. They thought it agitated the skin. So you dab delicately, trying to imitate the bathhouse regulars who dry off like sculpture restorers. The floor here is polished stone, slightly sloped toward small drains carved like lion mouths. Water and oil collect in thin streams, then disappear into the darkness. You notice the drains are cleaned constantly. A boy with a reed brush moves in quiet loops, scraping away residue before it hardens. His hands move like clockwork, never rushing, never stopping. You catch snippets of conversation from nearby. One man brags about owning a private bath the size of his atrium. Another boasts that his oil comes from Batica, Spain, if you're rusty on provinces. The implication is clear. His olive trees are classier than yours. You suppress a grin. The bathhouse may be public, but the ego is always private. And then there's the Sapo debate. A few regions of the empire, particularly in Gaul and Germania, used a form of early soap made from animal fat and ash. Romans, not fans. Too rustic, they claimed. Too drying. Soap was for barbarians. Real Romans used oil. You imagine a Gallic merchant defending his suds while being politely ushered toward the exit. That divide says a lot about Roman identity. Cleanliness wasn't just about health. It was about culture. To scrape, not scrub. To anoint, not lather. Even here, in the simplest act of washing, Rome draws a line between us and them. As your skin dries and the last of the oil is absorbed, you feel strangely reborn. Not just cleaner, but newer, smoother, a little smug. Is that the olive oil talking maybe? Or maybe it's the power of the strigil, the quiet Roman belief that scraping off dirt also scrapes off yesterday. You nod politely at the servant, slide your sandals back on, and head toward the next chamber. There's still more to see, more layers to peel back. But before you go, you pass one final detail: a shallow shelf lined with tiny glass vials, forgotten oils, scented remains, names long gone, each one proof that someone once cared deeply about how they smelled in a room full of steam. Here's something to chew on. What do crocodile fat, crushed pearls, and fermented fish sauce have in common? If you guessed ingredients in elite Roman beauty treatments, you'd be right. And if you're wondering what else the wealthy were willing to smear sip or soak in, well, prepare your pores. You exit the steamy rooms and move toward a quieter corridor, the air cooling against your freshly scraped skin. Here, tucked away from the echoing chambers and marble pools, lies a more specialized suite of rooms. Fewer people, lower lighting, and that unmistakable blend of incense and ambition. Welcome to the Roman spa. Within the bathhouse, the realm of rituals, remedies, and results. Immediately, you notice the decor shifts. Gone are the broad frescoes of Neptune and nymphs. These walls display smaller, more delicate paintings, women applying ointments, servants carrying bowls of odd substances, mirrors held just so. One image shows a well-dressed matron with cucumbers over her eyes, attended by 3 different slaves, one with a fan, one with a jar, and one suspiciously holding a live bird. Interpret that how you will. This is the unctorium, the massage and beautification zone. Not everyone comes here. Only those with coin connections or particular insecurities. You find a cushioned bench low and narrow with a small bronze mirror perched at the end. A servant offers you a tiny sample of scented oil, this one more floral than before, sharper, more expensive smelling. You nod. Let the pampering begin. A masseur approaches and begins kneading your shoulders with practiced impersonal grace. They don't speak unless spoken to. Their hands move with the precision of someone who has memorized every major pressure point. You relax until you hear the unmistakable squelch of a nearby facial mask being applied. And what a mask it is! A thick blend of barley flour, egg white, and yes, pulverized snails. Supposedly tightens the skin. The woman receiving it looks serene despite the faint glisten of mollusk across her cheeks. Her attendant hums while applying it as if soothing the snail spirits into compliance. Roman elites didn't just bathe, they beautified. Ancient writers cataloged dozens of recipes. Crushed pearls mixed into milk for whitening skin, crocodile dung as a supposed exfoliant, and yes, fish sauce, garum believed by some, to cure acne if applied thinly and endured bravely. You wonder how many skin problems were simply traded for new ones. A young man beside you is having his calluses sanded down with a pumice stone. Not a gentle affair. He winces once, then resumes sipping his diluted wine. Nearby, an older gentleman requests a hair tonic strong enough to convince Jupiter himself. The potion offered smells of garlic onions and something vaguely metallic. You hope it's the jar, not the contents. Historians still argue whether these treatments were genuinely believed to work, or if they were more about the ritual than the result. Was crocodile fat truly seen as magical or just impressively expensive? Did anyone really trust fermented fish as skincare? Or was it just a dare that spiraled into fashion? Then there's the matter of hair removal. Roman standards of beauty favored smoothness, especially among the upper classes. Waxing, plucking, even singeing were common. You spot a man grimacing slightly as a cloth strip is yanked from his arm. Another is holding very still while a slave applies a resin-based paste to his chest. For the gods, he whispers possibly to himself. Of course, the bathhouse beautification scene wasn't limited to men. While public spaces often segregated by gender or time of day, private areas like this could cater to both. Women of means would frequent these rooms with their entourages requesting treatments ranging from eyebrow shaping to full-body massages scented with cinnamon oil. You pass by a table laid with tools, bronze tweezers, bone combs, small cups filled with crushed minerals. One contains a reddish powder, likely cinnabar used to tint cheeks and lips. Another is a chalky paste used for skin lightening. You remember reading that paler skin signaled wealth, you weren't laboring in the sun after all. And then there's perfume. Not just a finishing touch, an entire identity. Romans wore scent the way we wear mood. musky blends for serious days, floral notes for flirtation. One senator reportedly had a different fragrance for each of his villas. His bathhouse signature, a blend of myrrh spikenard and a touch of saffron. You're not sure if that smells like success or soup. But even in these fragrant chambers, not everything sparkled. The treatments were time-consuming, expensive, and occasionally hazardous. Some whitening powders contained lead. Certain perfumes were so potent they caused headaches or worse. And while the slaves applying these potions had memorized every recipe, they rarely received them themselves. You catch a glimpse of a young attendant rinsing her hands in a shallow basin. Her skin is cracked from constant oil exposure. She wipes her fingers, then turns to fetch more pearls to crush. You wonder if she even knows what they cost. The man next to you stands now thoroughly pampered and drops a coin into a small dish. The coin bears the image of Hadrian bearded regal, mildly judging your posture. You follow suit, unsure whether you've been beautified or just very gently tricked into smelling like a pastry. Before leaving, you spot one last oddity, a large bowl filled with flower petals, each soaked in something oily and sweet. You ask what they're for. The attendant smiles and says, "For those who want to leave a trail." Charmed, confused, and lightly scented, you step back toward the main corridor. The echoes of whispered remedies and half-baked health claims fade behind you. You may not look like a Roman god, but for a moment, you might smell like one. You know those quiet corners in modern gyms, the ones no one talks about, but everyone uses. Now imagine them in marble, slightly damp, and suspiciously multifunctional. Roman bathhouses didn't just cater to sweat and beauty. Some rooms served needs that weren't listed on the tour brochure. As you stroll past the main bathing chambers, a side hallway draws your attention. It's narrower, a little darker, and carries a faint scent of rosemary and something less pleasant, earthy iron-tinged and persistent. You follow the corridor sandals clicking softly on the worn mosaic tiles until you reach a small courtyard tucked behind high walls. Here it's oddly serene. No fountains. No music. Just a collection of stone benches and narrow troughs lining the walls. This is the apoditarium minor, not to be confused with the grand changing room. This little annex was more of a spillover space. But unlike the other chambers, it served multiple low-key purposes. To your left is a shallow channel running with warm water. A young man squats beside it, soaking his feet and humming to himself. Beside him, a low table holds several earthenware jars. One is open. Inside, a cluster of something alive. Leeches. Medicinal leeches were surprisingly common in Roman spa areas. While not every bathhouse had a full-time medicus, many larger complexes partnered with healers or hosted informal consultations. Romans believed that imbalanced humors could be corrected by drawing blood, and what better place to do so than a damp, warm room with plenty of towels. A man nearby reclines with a cloth over his eyes, his arm extended while a leech dangles lazily from the inside of his elbow. His attendant holds a cup of spiced wine and a shallow bowl in case the sight becomes too much. But no one here looks disturbed. This is normal, comforting even. Next door to this chamber, past a heavy linen curtain, you find something altogether less medical, but just as curious, the latrinae, Roman toilets. Often communal, always conversational. You duck into the room and find yourself staring at a long marble bench, neatly punctuated by evenly spaced holes. Beneath a channel of flowing water, gurgles softly designed to carry waste away. On the wall, a shelf, not for decoration for sponge sticks. Yes, sponge sticks communal rinsed in vinegar water between uses and treated with more casual indifference than you'd think. You take a seat, not on the bench, but beside it, just to observe. A few bathers sit in deep conversation, utterly unfazed by the setting. One man gestures emphatically with a scroll. Another chuckles between comments about his nephew's new marriage. This, too, is Roman leisure. Even their most private acts were shared. Historians still debate how much privacy was expected or even desired in these moments. Some suggest the communal design promoted trust and equality. Others argue it was simply practical, more efficient, easier to clean, and cheaper to build. While you're there, someone enters with a tray of incense and burns a small piece by the doorway. Not for mood, but for smell. Roman engineers, for all their genius, never quite solved ventilation. So scented smoke was the next best option. Outside, a narrow room holds something unexpected: reclining couches. This isn't the dining hall. This is a rest zone, more like a nap nook. A place to lie down, towel draped, and daydream post-massage or post-latrine. One man snoozes gently, a damp cloth over his face. Another picks at a fig from a small bowl, clearly delaying his return to responsibility. And tucked between these spaces, you notice yet another oddity: a stack of amphorae filled not with wine or oil, but charcoal. Likely for the nearby furnace, but still odd to see it so casually stored among the lounging elite. Each of these corners tells a story not just about hygiene, but about multifunction. Roman baths weren't just for cleaning or relaxing. They were logistical hubs, places to heal, gossip, snack, and even quietly digest both ideas and olives. Back in the corridor, you pass a basin where someone is rinsing a bundle of herbs: rosemary, lavender, sage, likely bound for a massage table or an aroma treatment. But it strikes you as symbolic. Even in their most utilitarian moments, Romans insisted on layers: function, scent, texture, ritual. Nothing just was; everything had an angle. One final curiosity before you leave the quieter side: a wall engraving. Not a mosaic this time, but a carved quote, weathered but legible. It reads, "He who leaves here heavier in thought, but lighter in body, has bathed well." You tilt your head, wondering if it's meant to be profound, or just a gentle reminder to skip the pastries next time. You return to the main walkway with a slightly altered perspective. The grandeur of the caldarium, the sparkle of scented oils, they're only part of the story. It's the back rooms, the benches, the leeches, and latrines that show Rome's real obsession, not just with comfort, but with completeness. Because in a Roman bath, no part of the body or the daily experience was left unattended. Pause for a moment and look around. Not at the people, but at the walls, the floors, the ceilings. How did these massive bathhouses even exist? Who designed them? Who paid for them? What if the secret to Roman power wasn't just conquest, but plumbing? You're back in the main corridor now, following a polished stretch of mosaic that winds like a lazy stream toward a sun-drenched atrium. The buzz of conversation fades behind you. The air changes too, less steamy, more mineral-scented, with a faint echo that makes your footsteps feel almost theatrical. You've entered the architectural core of the complex, and like most things, Roman, it's subtly meant to impress. You glance up and realize the ceiling isn't just high, it floats. Vaulted arches draw your eyes upward, ribbed and coffered like a stone seashell. Light spills through oculus windows, dappling the floor like reflected water. This is no accident. The design is doing something to you, soothing you, centering you, reminding you, perhaps subconsciously, that Rome is not just a collection of people, but a machine of stone, water, and light. These baths weren't cobbled together over centuries. They were commissioned with intent, grand intent. Emperors like Caracalla Diocletian and Trajan poured vast sums into bath construction, not just as civic gifts, but as monuments to their own legacy. Bathhouses were political flexes in tile form. Look what I can build, they seem to say. Look what I can give you. You pause beside a massive column easily twice your height, its base carved with faint laurels and vines. Nearby, a tour guide, in Latin no less, is explaining the logic of hypocaust heating to a group of students. You eavesdrop shamelessly. The floor you're standing on, it's hovering. Beneath it, a grid of small brick pillars supports a second floor, essentially a giant crawl space. Hot air generated in a furnace room nearby circulates through these pillars and up into the walls, warming them from within. The result? Even heat, silent heat, radiant heat. And this wasn't a one-off invention. Romans installed hypocaust systems in villas, barracks, public buildings, even lighthouses. But in bathhouses, the tech reached its peak. It's what allowed these massive spaces to stay warm, cozy, and efficient. It also explains the constant parade of attendants carrying fuel-stoking fires, checking for cracks. You follow one such attendant down a narrower passage and glimpse the furnace room, all glowing embers, soot-stained walls, and rows of amphorae stacked like bricks. A man in a soot-dusted tunic is carefully adjusting a flue with a long iron rod. He wipes his brow, nods to no one in particular, and returns to his dance with fire. Back in the main hall, you spot a map carved into a marble slab, an overview of the complex. Pools, chambers, gardens, libraries. Yes, libraries. Some Roman baths house scroll rooms and reading alcoves, perfect for post-soak pondering. You trace your finger over the layout. It's like a small city within the city. And yet, for all its grandeur, the engineering was shockingly practical. Aqueducts fed the baths with fresh water, daily delivered with enough pressure to run fountains-filled pools and rinse entire rooms clean. That water didn't just vanish, it was collected, filtered, and sometimes reused. The same water might cool a room heat, another then irrigate a nearby garden. Historians still argue over the exact logistics, how much water was cycled, how efficient the drainage systems truly were. But the sheer scale is beyond doubt. The baths of Caracalla alone consumed an estimated 10 million liters a day. That's enough to fill 4 Olympic swimming pools. Daily. You cross a hallway where a floor mosaic depicts Neptune holding a trident surrounded by sea creatures. But look closer. Each creature is actually a pipe, a duct, a channel. It's a stylized blueprint, hidden in art. The Romans didn't just build infrastructure. They mythologized it. A guide nearby points to a set of hollow wall bricks, tubuli used to direct hot air upward, creating warm walls that didn't drip with condensation. You realize then, even the temperature of the marble was choreographed. Above you, the ceiling carries faint cracks, centuries old but still holding. You wonder who carved it, who polished it, who first stood in this spot and looked up just like you. And then you think about all the people who never saw it this way. The slaves, the builders, the cleaners, the ones who made the water run and the lights shimmer, but entered through side doors if at all. Even here, in the house of relaxation, hierarchy was etched into the walls. As you step into the next chamber, an enormous round pool glistens under an open dome. The sunlight cuts straight down like a spotlight. Bathers float lazily, their bodies outlined in gold. You dip a hand into the water, warm, smooth, almost velvety. This is the final promise of Roman architecture, that nature can be refined. And maybe that's the heart of it. The bathhouse wasn't just about water or heat. It was about showing that Rome could tame both, that the city, through its stones and arches and whispering pipes, could turn basic elements into elegance. You sit on a ledge, letting your feet dangle in the water, feeling the hum of the floor beneath you, the echo of design still pulsing softly through the marble. Not bad, you think, for a civilization known mostly for its roads and emperors. Something to ponder: what happens when you build a city that depends on flowing water, but then the water starts getting picky, or worse, quietly contaminated? The Romans may have mastered the bath, but did they also bathe themselves into trouble? The trickle begins before you even notice. Not the water, your thoughts. You're standing at the edge of another pool, now cooler than the last, with a thin stream cascading from a bronze lion's mouth. The sound is soothing, almost hypnotic. But behind that gentle flow is one of the most complicated and least understood marvels of the Roman world: their water. You've soaked in it, sat beside it, even admired its engineering. But now let's trace it back. That lion's mouth, fed by an aqueduct that might start miles away, perched in a mountain valley, or siphoning from a spring. Rome's aqueduct system spanned hundreds of kilometers, often carrying water across gorges and cliffs using gravity alone. You've likely heard of the Aqua Claudia, Aqua Appia, or Aqua Marcia, those majestic arches that marched across the countryside like skeletal highways. But the pipes underfoot, the ones tucked behind walls and under floors, those are where things get more interesting and murkier. Lead. That's the word that slips into your mind and refuses to leave. The Romans used fistulae lead pipes for indoor plumbing and water distribution. Easy to mold, long-lasting, relatively cheap. But they came with a catch. Lead, as we now know, isn't exactly spa day safe. Too much exposure can cause everything from fatigue to memory loss, and the Romans used it everywhere. But how dangerous was it really? Historians still argue. Some say the constant flow of water through these pipes minimized buildup. Others believe the low mineral content of Roman water made it more likely to leach lead into every ladleful. You step into a cooler chamber, now known as the natatio, an open-air swimming pool. Here the water is fresh, sparkling the sky, above a soft mosaic of clouds. You float, trying not to think about piping systems, but it's hard to forget what you've learned, especially when you spot a drain carved with a Latin inscription: "Pure water flows here." Trust in the flow. It's an oddly defensive message for a drain. Trust, after all, is a fragile thing, especially when it comes to something as invisible as poisoning. Still, not everyone believes the lead theory explains Rome's decline. Other metals were used too: bronze, ceramic, terracotta. Wealthy homes sometimes mixed pipe materials, and many public fountains relied on gravity rather than pressure. And then there's the fact that most people drank water that had been boiled and fused with herbs, or mixed with wine. You swim slowly across the natatio, watching birds wheel above. If you listen closely, you can hear the whisper of water trickling into underground cisterns, where sediment settles, and the water is filtered by design or just by time. Beside the pool, a servant pours a bucket into a small basin. The water splashes over worn stone, smooth from centuries of rinse and refill. Nearby, a young girl tosses a coin into the edge of the fountain. A superstition, perhaps. Or maybe just a hopeful habit. That's another layer to this faith in water. The Romans believed in the spirit of water. They built shrines to spring gods, tossed offerings into wells, even swore oaths beside streams. Water wasn't just for cleaning. It was sacred, alive. You step out of the pool towel off and walk along a corridor where wall plaques list the names of donors, wealthy patrons who sponsored aqueduct extensions or purification basins. Charity with a PR twist. The inscriptions speak of civic pride, but also responsibility. Water wasn't free. It was gifted, regulated, and occasionally hoarded. You pass a smaller fountain, just a trickle over a carved dolphin. Below it, moss grows between the stones. A man kneels there, filling a clay jar. He's not part of the leisure crowd. His tunic is patched. He's not here to bathe. He's here to collect. Likely taking water back to someone who can't or won't enter the bathhouse. Even in a city of marble and mosaics, access wasn't equal. And still, the water flows. Rome had entire offices dedicated to water management. The curatores, aquarium, oversaw aqueducts, fountains, and flow rates. Inspectors checked for illegal taps. Builders designed filtration systems with settling tanks and overflow channels. And when something broke, an army of laborers worked round the clock to fix it. But like any complex system, the water infrastructure required constant care. And when the empire began to strain economically, politically, that care became harder to maintain. Fountains dried up, pipes cracked. Lead may not have poisoned the people, but neglect poisoned the pipes. You linger at a basin dipping your fingers into the water. Cool, clean. Maybe. It's hard to tell with something you can't see. The Romans trusted their water. They built their lives around it, their cities, their stories, even their gods. But like all things that flow, power, wealth, health, it only takes one unseen blockage to disrupt the illusion of permanence. You step away, sandals damp, thoughts swirling. Not paranoid, just curious. You've seen the tiles, the pools, the perfume. But who's scrubbing the steam room at midnight? Who's fetching the firewood, catching the leeches, polishing the statues, and remembering everyone's favorite oil blend for every luxury someone made it look effortless? And they almost never had a name. You pass a side doorway draped with thick wool curtains. Beyond it, a scene most bathgoers barely register. A long, narrow room, dimly lit, smelling of damp stone ash and lavender, an odd trio that somehow fits. Here is where the labor breathes. This is a serviarium, a holding space for attendant slaves and service staff. You duck your head to enter. Inside activity hums low, rhythmic, practiced. A man is folding towels still warm from the sun. Another is wringing out cloths soaked in vinegar. Several are carrying buckets, tools trays, quietly navigating around each other in an unspoken choreography. They don't talk much, but you catch small fragments, jokes, whispered names, muttered someone's complaint about a senator who smells like a garden but tips like a beggar. It's the backstage of the Roman spa world. A young boy, maybe 9, maybe 10, rushes past with a wooden box of bronze strigils, each one carefully polished, arranged like precious instruments. He pauses just long enough to glance at you, then moves on, no time for tourists. Roman bathhouses ran on slave labor. There's no softer way to put it. From the heating engineers in the Hippocaust tunnels to the masseurs, oil bearers, towel washers, leech handlers, cup fillers, and floor scrubbers, each played a part in the illusion of effortless cleanliness. The balneatores were the most visible, the bath attendants who worked the floors. They cleaned, served advised, and occasionally endured personal insults in exchange for coin. Some gained a kind of status famous for their massages, admired for their conversation. A few even earned enough to buy freedom. Others never left this room. You pause beside a long stone shelf, stacked with wooden sandals, extras loaners, some missing their straps. A man beside you is scraping a strigil with sand and lemon juice. His hands are calloused, his tunic bleached pale from hundreds of washes. He doesn't look up. Historians still debate the structure of labor inside these facilities. Some workers were slaves, others were freedmen contracted through private companies. Some were owned by the state, others by wealthy patrons who leased them to bathhouses. What's clear is that the work was constant. Consider the fire tenders. Hidden beneath the floors, inside narrow furnace corridors, they kept the heat flowing through the Hippocaust system. It was dirty, dangerous, and brutally hot. One slip, one blocked flue, and the entire caldarium went cold. And guess who got blamed? You wander into a smaller chamber, lined with clay jars. This is the storage room filled with oil herbs, waxcloth salts, and dried flowers. A girl no older than 13 is slicing rosemary with alarming speed. She hums quietly, stopping only to rub her eyes, careful not to touch her fingers to her skin. Oil stings. There's no applause here, no mosaic of their deeds. But if you removed this workforce, even for a day, the marble would dull, the water would stagnate, and the bathhouse would crumble into awkward silence. One inscription found in Pompeii reads, "I bathed where Marcus scraped." That's it. No surname, no backstory. But whoever Marcus was, he left an impression, literally. As you pass back toward the main hall, you spot another crew, mopping the entry tiles. A young man with a scar across his cheek wipes sweat from his brow, then flicks a towel with surprising elegance. He pauses to watch a senator glide past. Not envious, just observant. And then he's back to work. Even in the quietest corners, hierarchy echoes. A final detail. A chipped wall panel near the exit shows a list, likely an old rota or chore schedule. The Latin is faded, but you can make out the words fire buckets, towels, blades, sweep rest. The last one is crossed out. You step into the light again, grateful in a way you weren't before. Not just for the warmth or the oils, but for the invisible web of effort stretched under every footstep, every drop of water. Because while Rome may have been built by emperors, it was cleaned by ghosts. You might think all this lounging and steaming left little room for business. But what if some of Rome's most important deals weren't made in marble halls or senate chambers, but in steamy alcoves and damp corridors? And what if the bathhouse handshake came with a side of scented oil? As you wander back through the more public sections of the bathhouse, something about the crowd feels different. Louder, more intentional. You're no longer in the part of the building where people bathe to unwind. This, it seems, is the networking zone where social climbing happens in sandals and bathrobes. The room you're in isn't labeled. There's no grand arch or statue of Apollo, just a curved ceiling rows of benches and that familiar murmur of voices too quiet to be accidental. You sit at the edge listening. Two men are discussing grain prices. Not just abstract economics, but actual shipments, names, dates. One pulls a scroll from under his tunic, unrolling it, just enough to reveal a column of figures. Nearby, a woman in a finely stitched stola leans in to correct someone on a land boundary dispute, gently but firmly. This is where side deals bloom. Contracts, whispered favors, offered gossip carefully packaged as harmless updates, all within the sauna-soft acoustics of the Roman bathhouse. You spot another pair, one clearly, a merchant the other, judging by the ring and bearing some kind of magistrate. They nod, chuckle, then rise together and walk off toward the frigidarium. Nothing signed, no handshake, but something was sealed just the same. Historians still debate how much real business was conducted in the baths versus how much was posturing. Was it like golfing with senators or speed dating for influence? Probably a bit of both. What we do know is that bathhouses were one of the few spaces in Rome where class lines blurred, at least on the surface. And that blur made opportunity. Freedmen trying to land contracts, young lawyers angling for a patron, aging aristocrats seeking gossip to stay relevant. The bathhouse was a marketplace, but instead of booths and stalls, there were benches and steam. You catch a snippet of Latin that makes you pause. A name you heard earlier linked now to a scandal involving temple funds and a missing shipment of marble. No one speaks louder than necessary. No one repeats the word bribe. But the meaning is clear. One man gestures toward a nearby slave and murmurs something with a smile. A moment later, a folded wax tablet changes hands. Not money yet, but a note. Perhaps a promise. Perhaps a price. In another corner, a quieter sort of business takes place. A poet recites under his breath to a small cluster of admirers. His scroll shakes slightly, but he continues. When he finishes, there's polite clapping, and then a subtle passing of coins into his empty oil dish. Bathhouses, it turns out, were also open mics. Nearby, a philosopher scribbles notes on a wax tablet while frowning at the ceiling. He mutters about moral decay and the sponge stick of destiny, then snaps his stylus in half. Someone hands him a replacement. The cycle continues. Even the vendors join the fray. An oil seller near the side door murmurs to a friend that his Cilician blend outsells the Egyptian one 4 amphorae to 1. His friend nods unconvinced while stealing olives from a platter nearby. Not all business is grand. One woman negotiates the price of a custom strigil with a craftsman who claims his last one was used by a senator. Which senator, she asks. He winks. She rolls her eyes, then buys 2. Even children get in on it. You spot a young boy showing off a carved wooden dolphin to 2 others bartering for dried figs. He holds firm. Figs are valuable. The dolphin is rare, a little water-warped, but charming. You sit back and take it in a city inside a bathhouse humming with negotiation. Some of it petty, some of it powerful, all of it oddly civilized. There are no shouting matches, no visible desperation, just warm air, glistening skin, and the quiet rise and fall of fortunes. And yet there are rules, unspoken but strong. No accusations, no open confrontation. Everything done with a smile, a nod, a half-raised eyebrow. If something serious needs to be said, it's said later over wine perhaps, or not at all. You stand stretching your legs and head toward a quieter corridor. As you pass a group huddled near a column, you hear one final phrase that sums it all up. If it can't be bathed, it can't be trusted. You don't know exactly what that means, but it lingers in the steam like truth. Let's ask the obvious. Were all these half-naked debates and back-scrubbing deals really just about hygiene? Or did Rome's philosophers, generals, and gossipers know that beneath the soap and steam, the bathhouse was something more, a stage for ideas wrapped in towels? You wander into a long gallery just off the main axis of the bathhouse. The steam is lighter here. The air smells faintly of ink, olive oil, and old sandalwood. At first glance, it looks like a waiting room. Benches, alcoves, A few bored-looking attendants leaning on their elbows. But then someone coughs, loudly, clears his throat, and begins to speak. And so if man is water, and water seeks its own level, is the soul not always trying to escape uphill, a ripple of laughter, polite sleepy. You've stumbled into the most delightfully absurd corner of the Roman bathhouse, the debate nook. Not official, not formal, but always occupied. Somewhere between philosophical salon and late-night talk show, these gatherings were part performance, part confession, part tradition. The speaker is middle-aged, barefoot, and draped in a towel that looks too short for comfort. He gestures dramatically with a stylus pointing at the wall as if it holds charts. It does not. Behind him, a mosaic of two dolphins and a flute offers exactly zero philosophical reinforcement. Still, the audience listens. A handful of listeners nod thoughtfully, a few make faces. One younger man doodles on a wax tablet and whispers sarcastic commentary to his neighbor. The neighbor, a woman with arms crossed and one sandal off, doesn't laugh, but she's clearly listening. This is where the bathhouse turned brainy, not always wisely, but consistently. Rome didn't invent the idea of public debate, but they certainly marinated it in steam. Some came here to test ideas before sharing them in the forum. Others just like to hear themselves echo. A few genuinely were working out questions that probably had no answers. You take a seat near the edge, pretending not to stare at the speaker's rapidly slipping towel. He's onto metaphors now, the body as an amphora, the mind as steam, the soul as an unwashed window. Someone asks, but who scrapes the window? Another adds, and how often it devolves from there. Historians still argue whether these philosophical bath debates were respected or ridiculed. Satirists certainly had fun with them. Seneca Marshall, even Juvenal, took swipes at the towel-clad orators. But others took it seriously. After all, where else could a merchant, a freedman, and a minor poet debate destiny without formal rank? You spot another group gathered around a low bench. They're not speaking in full sentences. They're quoting passages from Virgil, Ovid, even Homer. One man quotes, another responds with the next line. A few chuckle at missed words or creative edits. It's like trivia night for the literate elite. And yet no one here is performing for fame. There's no stage, no coin jar. Just a desire to think aloud with steam in your lungs and oil in your pores. A philosopher scribbles something on a wax tablet, reads it aloud, then smudges it with his thumb. Too proud, he says, too purple. Another leans over and offers a rewrite. They swap styluses. It's the most civil form of ego polishing you've ever seen. Not everyone approves, of course. A senator passing by mutters, "This is why we lose wars. Too many poets, not enough fighters." He's ignored. The poetry continues. You're handed a fig and invited to muse silently. No pressure. The fig is sweet. The silence is warm. A woman near the back begins telling a parable, something about a farmer, a lost sandal, and a fish that speaks in riddles. It's unclear whether it's a moral tale or just a nap talking, but no one interrupts. They're listening because she's speaking, and maybe because the acoustics are perfect. You take in the room again. No one looks powerful here. Not in the usual Roman sense. No gold chains, no guards, no scroll bearers. Just soft bellies, oiled shoulders, thoughtful frowns, and the occasional philosophical tangent involving bath sponges. And yet, this is power of a different kind, the kind that lingers. Someone in this room will quote someone else tomorrow. Someone will write down a phrase and slip it into a speech. Someone will leave feeling heard. As you get up to leave, the speaker concludes with a flourish, and thus we are all just droplets waiting to condense. Polite applause. Someone mutters, needs a better ending. Another suggests, maybe something about togas. You walk away smiling, not because of the debate, but because you've seen something rare minds rinsing off alongside bodies, and maybe becoming a little clearer in the process. Have you ever wondered how something as simple as a sponge on a stick could spark centuries of speculation, or why Rome's most private habit became one of its most peculiar legacies? Let's just say, the end of an empire can be traced through its bathroom drawer. You return to one of the side wings of the bath complex, this one quieter, cooler, and noticeably emptier than the rest. It's not abandoned, just forgotten. There's a stillness here, broken only by the soft drip of water from a cracked spout and the muffled shuffle of sandals on worn tile. This, according to a small inscription near the doorway, is the Sphangia room. You blink at the word uncertain, whether it's a misspelled god or a cleaning supply. Turns out it's the latter, and it might be the most Roman artifact you've never considered. The Sphangia was the ancient toilet sponge, mounted on a stick, rinsed in vinegar, reused, recycled, occasionally debated in public forums. It's not glamorous, but it's real, and Roman bathhouses were full of them. You enter the room and spot a row of marble seats latrines again, only this time there's no conversation. Just silence, save for a lone servant who's rinsing a bundle of cloths in a small basin. A shelf above the benches holds several wooden sticks, each topped with what looks like dried sea sponge tied securely with twine. They rest in a vinegar bath, gently bobbing like pickles in a jar. Functional, frugal, mildly terrifying. Historians still argue how often these sponges were replaced, or if they were even shared. Some suggest bathers brought their own. Others believe bath slaves were responsible for keeping them clean and rotated. The idea of communal use, debated, disputed, denied, but also strangely plausible. One satirical poem from the period describes a man boasting about owning a sphangia of imported origin, as if it were a fine wine or a designer sandal. Another account describes a guest bringing a personal cleaning stick to a dinner party. Hygiene or status symbol. It's a fine line. And then came the decline. You notice a small pile of broken sponge sticks in the corner, discarded and forgotten. The room smells faintly of vinegar old wood and something less describable. This wasn't the glamorous part of Roman life, but it was undeniably part of it. As the empire began to weaken financially, politically, logistically, so too did its habits. Bathhouses fell into disrepair. Furnaces went cold. Pools dried up. And the most basic necessities like sponges became symbols of a system stretched too thin. A historian once wrote that the fall of Rome could be measured not in battles lost, but in sponges not replaced. Dramatic perhaps. But here, in this quiet room, with its vinegar jars and worn benches, it feels oddly true. You wander past a cracked mosaic depicting Hygiea, goddess of health. Her arm is outstretched not with a torch or a scroll, but a sponge. It's hard to tell whether the artist was serious or sly. Outside the room, a short corridor leads to an old storeroom. The door is ajar. Inside, rows of amphorae, some empty, some sealed with wax. A few are labeled rose oil, barley paste vinegar. One simply says residue. You don't open that one. This part of the bathhouse isn't just about cleanliness. It's about the limits of cleanliness. About what happens when routines erode, when luxury becomes labor, and when civilization's finest comforts are reduced to awkward workarounds. A final inscription near the exit reads, "Let not the sponge fall before the empire." You laugh. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe it's a prophecy. Maybe it's just a reminder that no ritual, however mundane, is immune to history. You step back into the main corridor, the bustle of voices returning like a tide. But you carry something with you now, not a sponge, thankfully, but a deeper sense of what it meant to live at the height of Rome, and how even the smallest tools reveal the biggest truths. Step carefully. You're not in the golden age anymore. The plaster is cracking. The fountains sputter. That familiar scent of rosemary now competes with something more metallic. What does it look like when an empire's bathhouses begin to forget how to bathe? You exit the quieter wing and walk through a breezeway where wind pulls at a loose curtain. It flutters over a chipped mosaic, once showing dolphins, now missing tails, missing heads. The grout between the tiles is crumbling like dry bread. You step over a puddle that hasn't drained properly and begin to notice what once hid behind the marble. This is still a Roman bathhouse, yes, but not at its peak. The marble columns remain, but the shine is gone. A faint green tinge curls around the base moss, or something older. The hot water pools are lukewarm, the oil trays half empty. A boy sits idly beside a massage bench, spinning a strigil by its handle, waiting for someone who might not come. It's not neglect exactly. It's exhaustion. The feeling that everything is still running, but just barely. You find yourself in a secondary frigidarium, likely added on later during a renovation or expansion. The ceiling is lower here, less ornate. The decorative reliefs are simpler. The water cooler, but with a faint mineral film clinging to the edges. A man sits alone, humming softly, swirling his feet in the shallows. Rome at this point is straining under its own weight. The baths, once a point of pride, public virtue and elite performance have begun to slip. Not entirely, not everywhere, but enough to notice. Maintenance is more sporadic. Oil quality varies. The fig trays are replaced less often. You overhear a whisper about a heating room that went cold for 3 days because firewood didn't arrive. The slaves patch leaks with rags, now not bronze. One corridor is closed entirely. Under renovation, a sign claims, though no work is being done. Historians still debate how widespread this decline was. Some argue that even in Rome's twilight, the baths remained relatively luxurious. Others suggest that by the late 4th century, cracks literal and metaphorical were visible everywhere. You spot a pair of bathers discussing property values. One mentions moving to Constantinople. The other sighs and says, "Better pipes there." Half joking, maybe. But the comparison stings. Even the art reflects the shift. A nearby fresco, once vivid with nymphs and sea beasts, has faded to pink smudges and ghostly outlines. A centaur has lost his face. A triton's tail is peeling at the edge. The stories on the walls are becoming whispers. You pass the main furnace chamber and glance inside. It's running, but sluggishly. The heat doesn't punch like it used to. The fire tenders look tired. One leans on a pile of wood, dozing. Another is picking ash from a crack in the brickwork with a spoon. In another room, a boy is trying to polish a basin with a rag that's more whole than cloth. He's determined, though. You watch him scrub, pause, sigh, and start again. It's not his fault the shine won't return. And then beyond all the wear and tear, you notice something deeper, the mood. It's changed. The bathhouse used to hum with laughter, gossip, philosophy, mischief. Now the soundscape has softened. More muttering, fewer jokes. The spaces feel heavier, like they know something they haven't said aloud. You sit on a bench in the atrium. Nearby, a small trio plays music pipes and a soft drum. They're good, but the tempo lags. No one's watching. Someone passes carrying a stack of broken amphorae. Not trash, just waiting for reuse. A man nods to you, tired eyes behind a polite smile. You nod back, unsure why it feels like goodbye. Still, the baths go on. People still come, still soak, still argue about fish sauce and poetry. Rome's rituals die slowly, if they die at all. But you can't shake the feeling that the water isn't quite as clean, the marble not quite as cold, the air not quite as bright. And somewhere in the background, a pipe drips. Let's imagine you walk into a room built for 1,000 voices and hear none. No laughter, no splash, no shuffle of sandals. Just stone. What do abandoned bathhouses leave behind when the water drains and the echoes stop echoing? You're standing now at the edge of history. Not figuratively, literally. Before you, the remains of a Roman bathhouse exposed to sky wind and time. The arches are still there, though cracked. The pools are empty, layered with dust and the occasional bird feather. Mosaics cling to the walls like forgotten wallpaper. One dolphin, half erased by erosion, still leaps across a fragment of sea foam. It's a ruin, but somehow still a presence. You step onto the old floor, careful not to catch your sandal on loose stone. The shape of the rooms is still clear. You can trace where the frigidarium once chilled, where the caldarium once steamed, where the walls pulsed with heat. It's all there if you know how to read it. You imagine the bathers, the bustling slaves, the sleepy senators, the philosophers arguing over figs. You imagine the oil, the towels, the gossip, the scraping, the murmured deals. It's easy to see, and even easier to miss. The wind moves through the Hippocaust tunnels, now no longer heat, but breath. The underfloor pillars, once part of a hidden miracle, now lean like exhausted teeth. A single arch remains intact, framing the sky. It makes the ruin feel theatrical, as if Rome meant for even its decay to look majestic. You spot a bench, or what's left of it, crumbling, slumped against a wall. Above it, a niche likely held a statue Apollo, maybe. Now it holds birds' nests and the long shadow of an olive tree. Historians walk these ruins and debate. Some argue these spaces were simply repurposed, turned into shops, workshops, even churches. Others say they were left to fade deliberately, their grandeur too tightly wound to unravel gently. One scholar referred to them as Rome's sunken stages, where the play ended, but the lights never went out. You find a spot where the mosaic floor is nearly intact. Neptune, again trident raised, gaze stern. His sea creatures still dance, though chipped and faded. You sit beside him, quietly feeling the cold press of stone through your clothing. There's a kind of reverence here, not because it's sacred, but because it once mattered so much. The energy of design, the architecture of leisure, the choreography of an entire civilization's daily exhale, it all happened here. Not on a battlefield, not in a temple. Here. You think back to the oil-slicked laughter, the philosophical one-liners, the sponge debates the politics beneath the steam. And you realize the baths weren't just about hygiene or comfort or luxury. They were about participation. Being Roman wasn't just a citizenship. It was a ritual, a rhythm. And when that rhythm broke, when the pipes cracked, the fig trays stopped appearing, and the sponge sticks were no longer restocked, Rome didn't fall with a crash. It faded pool by pool. You rise, brushing dust from your hands. the lights shifting now warmer lower. The ruin casts longer shadows, and yet it still feels like a place waiting for something. Not resurrection, but memory. At the entrance arch, someone has scratched a word into the stone. Just one. Fuit. Latin for it was. Not dramatic, not mournful. Just a record. And as you step away, the breeze carries the faint scent of rosemary, or maybe your imagination, but it lingers. You probably imagine stone pillars and men in togas reclining in hot pools, and sure, that's part of it. But behind the warm water and serenity lies a world of clinking coins, whispered deals, and more sweat equity than you'd expect, both literal and metaphorical. You pass through the stone archway into the frigidarium, the coolest chamber of the Roman bath complex, and already the atmosphere feels different. Not just from the chill, but from the undercurrent of commerce humming through the corridors. The baths are grand, yes, but they're also marketplaces, community centers, luxury resorts, and job sites, all rolled into one. If the Colosseum was where Rome showed off its muscle, the baths were where it flexed its wealth. At first glance, the layout seems simple. Cold rooms, warm rooms, hot rooms, maybe a swimming pool if the funding allowed. But behind every heated bench is a furnace, and behind every splash is a supply chain. The floors are inlaid with mosaic dolphins, but their beauty hides the reality. Every tile laid meant a craftsman paid every repair, a contract awarded. Baths weren't just places to unwind, they were engines of local and imperial economics. The funding itself, a fascinating tangle. Some baths were commissioned by emperors looking to curry favor with the public, a political investment, really. Others were gifts from wealthy patrons who wanted their names etched in marble. You'd stroll and glance at an inscription over the arch and see something like Lucius Flavius paid for this with his own coin. A subtle flex, as the kids say. Historians still argue whether these patronage projects were sincere philanthropy or just clever PR. After all, what better way to ensure your legacy than by building the place where everyone in town comes to relax, gossip, and accidentally mention your name? Oh yes, this steam room. Lucius built it, such a generous man. Construction brought a boom. Masons, carpenters, mosaic artists, painters, laborers. Then came the administrators and accountants. Someone had to keep track of all those purchases: marble from Greece, lead pipes from Britannia, bricks stamped with the insignia of the emperor himself. Every bath complex was a small town's worth of contracts and jobs. Even choosing the site was strategic. Near a natural hot spring, perfect, less wood to burn. Near a port, even better, you could import exotic luxuries. One inscription brags that its bath had water from a sacred spring and oil from Hispania. Think of it as ancient product placement, complete with geographic tags. And let's talk aesthetics. Those stunning columns, imported. The ceiling frescoes, commissioned. That one room with black and white marble alternating like a chessboard. Definitely an upsell. You don't just walk through a bathhouse, you tour a showroom of imperial affluence. But beyond the elegance, these were practical spaces. Your average Roman didn't have plumbing at home, let alone a bathtub. The baths were hygienic outposts, albeit crowded ones. And where there's a crowd, there's commerce. You start to notice the little things. A booth here, a bench there, a man quietly polishing brass fittings while eyeing the foot traffic. This place doesn't run on steam alone. It runs on coin status and a whole lot of behind-the-scenes labor. A whispering scholar in the corner mentions the baths of Caracalla, perhaps the most lavish ever built. They had libraries, gardens, even a sort of proto-gymnasium. You get the sense that Roman baths were less about bathing and more about existing in style, a kind of curated wellness economy long before the term existed. One traveler scribbles in his wax tablet about the dozens of workers required just to heat a single caldarium chamber. The fuel demand was staggering. Wood deliveries ran almost daily, and someone had to stoke those hippocaust fires constantly. It wasn't just about soaking in heat, it was about producing it, maintaining it, monetizing it. And so as you ease into the rhythm of the baths, you start to realize you're not just a bather. You're a participant in a living, hissing, steaming economic organism. This isn't just water, it's liquidity in every sense of the word. Before you step into the steamy heart of the bath complex, pause a moment at the threshold. There's a wooden board on the wall, painted in fading red and black ink, that almost everyone stops to read. Not a warning, not a schedule. It's a list of prices. But what's being sold here, and to whom? Why does someone in a purple-trimmed toga smirk while someone else shuffles away, frowning? It's just a bath. Or is it? You clutch your coin pouch and step forward, realizing not every Roman bath was equally public, and certainly not equally affordable. There's a murmur in the air, a blend of coins, clinking sandals, scuffing, and murmured haggles, and it leads you to the cella admissionis, the place where you pay to enter. You imagine it's like the ticket window at a modern swimming pool, but with more togas and far less glass. The attendant, usually a slave or a lower-ranked freedman, sits behind a wooden counter, eyes scanning your attire, your posture, maybe even your scent. Entry wasn't free. Prices varied based on the type of bath, the location, and the whims of the governing authority. For most public baths, the cost was modest, perhaps 1 quadrans the smallest bronze coin, about a quarter of an ace. It was affordable for the average citizen, yes, but it was still a barrier. And if you were a woman, it often cost more. Historians still argue whether women paid double because their hours were limited or because they were viewed as less central to civic life. Either way, it's a curious little inequality baked into the foundation of daily hygiene. But even within those humble quadrants, there were class signals. Show up in threadbare tunic pay, in greasy coins, and you're pointed toward the simpler sections. No frills, no fragrances. Walk in with a retinue silk trim, and that knowing patrician tilt of the head, you might be ushered toward more refined chambers, offered scented oils, or perhaps just granted a warmer welcome. In elite bathhouses, or at least the ones attached to grand villas, there were literal tiers of access. Entry level gave you a basic soak and steam. Mid-level might include a clean towel, a dab of oil, and the chance to hear better gossip. Top tier. That could mean a private cubicle, imported sponges, and a servant to scrub your back with something that allegedly came from the Nile. And yes, there were exceptions. On certain public holidays, emperors might declare a free bathing day. A clever move, it kept the people clean happy and talking about how generous the emperor was. Still, those days were chaos. Imagine the queue for the tepidarium when half of Rome decides to show up at once. In some provincial towns, local authorities tried to subsidize bath use. One inscription reads, "For the welfare of the people, the bath shall be open at midday to all citizens of status." A fine sentiment, unless you weren't quite of status. Then you waited, or paid, or went home damp and disappointed. This class-based access didn't just affect comfort. It shaped social dynamics inside the bath. Picture it, the wealthy recline in the hottest pool chatting politics. Middle-class merchants rotate between warm and cold, trying not to look upward too much. Lower classes scrub, quickly avoid eye contact, and keep to the edges. The architecture even played along. Some entrances were grand arched, pillared with carved marble signs, and maybe a mosaic of Neptune welcoming you. Others were side doors, narrow low, a bit damp. A quiet way of saying, you may enter, but through here. Children often entered free, though mostly during certain hours. Slaves. It depended on the master. Some allowed bathing time, considering it a way to maintain health. Others didn't bother. And of course, some slaves entered not to bathe, but to work as fire tenders, towel carriers, massage assistants. More on them later. You spot a curious little sign near the changing room. No credit. Coin only. That's right. Even in antiquity, the bath was a cash economy. Forget your coin, and you weren't getting in, no matter how loudly you quoted Cicero. A few elite baths experimented with tokens, small stamped discs that represented prepaid services. Some even had the image of a bathhouse or a stylized figure pouring water. Historians still debate whether these were memberships vouchers or part of a Roman loyalty program. Collect 10, get a free oil scrape. There's also some evidence, faint but compelling, that bathhouses issued daily color codes. A small piece of dyed wool, or leather to mark your payment tier. Green, for basic blue, for scented steam. Purple, for private cubicle. That last color naturally echoed the imperial hue. As you step into the atrium, past a man fanning himself with a laurel-embossed leaf, you notice that everything in this place nudges you toward your station. Where you sit, who talks to you whether you get dry or drip dry, it all whispers something about your place in Rome. And sometimes people tried to cheat that system. A well-known story tells of a clever freedman who smeared himself with perfumed oil before entering, hoping the scent would grant him access to the elite section. He was promptly sniffed out literally and fined. Romans may have bathed daily, but their noses were sharp. Then there were those who tried to buy their way up the hierarchy. Offer a coin to the attendant, just a little extra, and perhaps you'd get a warmer towel or a spot closer to the musicians. Was it bribery? Probably. Was it common? Definitely. Just like today's upgraded boarding passes or premium lounge access luxury always found a way to climb. What's especially telling is how children learned this system early. They'd accompany parents clutching small purses, learning when to pay, where to sit, and whom to nod to. It wasn't just bathing, it was cultural onboarding. Even the time of day mattered. Early morning was for the humble laborers cleaning off the dust of dawn. Midday was merchant hour. Evening. That's when the elites showed up, hair-curled robes, pristine with maybe a philosopher in tow for bonus status. And for all the structure, there was still room for quiet rebellion. A patrician might choose the common pool for appearances just to appear humble. A merchant might splurge on a high-tier entry just to feel powerful for an hour. These little economic decisions were wrapped in pride identity and social choreography. So next time someone calls the Roman bathhouse a public space, remember, this public didn't mean equal. Access was a currency, and your status was as visible as your sandals were wet. Just beyond the changing room, the air thickens with warmth, and something else, commerce. But there are no storefronts, no hanging signs, no loud haggling. So where is it? Who's selling what? And why does that man keep glancing over his shoulder while rubbing oil into another's back? Welcome to the quiet marketplace inside the steam. You wipe the condensation from your forehead as you step into the tepidarium. The warmth is gentle, coaxing you to relax, but your senses stay alert. There's a rhythm here, not just the drip of water or the soft slap of sandals, but the hum of quiet transactions taking place around you. A boy approaches with a wooden tray, and without a word, offers an assortment of items: pumice stones, bronze scrapers, tiny jars of oil. He's not just being helpful. This is his job. He's one of the bathhouse vendors, and he's hoping for a sale. Bathhouses were microcosms of Roman life, and that meant business thrived here too. You might have arrived to soak, but you'll leave having spent more than you planned. And the services don't end at the water's edge. They linger walk, with you whisper in your ear, sometimes literally. Historians still debate how many of these vendors were officially licensed versus how many slipped in under the radar. Some bathhouses charged merchants a daily fee to set up. Others turned a blind eye, especially if the vendor offered a percentage of their profits to the staff. It's a Roman version of the food truck permit. And what a variety they offered. Masseur stations popped up near the hotter chambers. These weren't the kind of massages you book a week in advance. They were quick, practical, and usually involved vigorous scraping with a strigil and a lot of olive oil. The masseurs worked for tips, sometimes wages, and often carried their tools wrapped in worn cloths. You'd see them walking around, flexing their fingers like athletes preparing for a match. You pause near one such vendor. He's massaging a balding senator whose eyes are half closed in bliss. When the treatment ends, there's no bill, just a nod, a coin slipped discreetly into a pouch. Payment was always subtle part of the etiquette. Loud bartering was considered tacky. Classy baths had classy economics. And then there were the perfumers. They didn't just sell oils, they sold identities. Want to smell like an officer returning from Parthia? Try this spiced blend. Want to impress a widow at the far end of the caldarium? A drop of imported rose essence might do. Prices varied widely. A basic oil was a few asses. A rare blend from Syria that could cost as much as your monthly food budget. One vendor, old and sly-eyed, offers you a free dab. On the house, he says, then winks. You nod politely and move on. You'll smell that oil for hours. A slow advertisement trailing behind your every step. A corner near the plunge pool houses another set of specialists, hair pluckers, and nail shapers. Yes, even body grooming was outsourced. Roman ideals of beauty included smooth skin and neat nails, and these modest artisans offered both. The process could be sharp, but effective. And if you complained, they'd just shrug. The Greeks invented it, they'd say. That seemed to excuse a lot. A scholarly scroll from the 2nd century mentions a whispering chorus of salesmen drifting through the baths. It's not poetic license. Some vendors literally whispered. It was part of the atmosphere. Low voices, quiet trades, coins gently clinking. The bath was not a marketplace of shouting, but of murmured persuasion. One curious role was the lector, hired to read aloud to clients while they bathed or relaxed. Some were slaves with clear voices. Others were professional reciters trained in the cadences of Cicero or the ribald verses of Catullus. Want to hear about the Punic Wars while soaking? That'll be a denarius, please. Then there were the snack boys. Not everyone bathed on an empty stomach. Vendors sold dates, nuts, small flatbreads. Hot foods were rare, but you might get a bit of warm wine with spices poured from brass kettles that hissed in the humid air. You sip slowly, careful not to spill. The floor is already slippery enough. It's not just goods and services on offer. Some vendors were more conversational. They'd lean in, compliment your robe, mention they had connections for something special. That could mean anything from a private massage to a borrowed towel from the governor's stockpile. Nothing illegal, just discreet. Bathhouse staff might look the other way, especially if tipped. Historians still argue whether some vendors doubled as informants or messengers. There's at least one inscription near Ostia describing a trusted whisperman of the caldarium. Scholars aren't sure if that was praise, sarcasm, or both. You sit on a warm bench and observe. Every movement, every trade, every exchange, it all adds up. The vendors move like fish through steam, avoiding collisions, making eye contact, offering just enough without intruding. It's economic ballet. And the best part, you don't even notice it at first. That's the design. The bathhouse economy was gentle, embedded, almost invisible. But by the time you leave, your pouch is lighter, your skin glossier, and your sandals smell faintly of imported citrus. Mission accomplished for them. This is what makes Roman baths so fascinating. They weren't just places to wash. They were ecosystems. The walls may have echoed with conversation, but behind the murmur was a steady rhythm of coin and commerce, of whispers and wares. And now, as you step into the warmer inner chambers, you begin to wonder what fuels this system behind the scenes. Who organizes the goods, the oils, the towels? Who makes the supply flow? Day after day, you're about to find out. Not all Roman fortunes were made in marble halls or Senate debates. Some began with a jug of olive oil and a sturdy ladle. Ever wonder how something as simple as oil became one of the most valuable resources inside a bathhouse? Why did Romans treat it like liquid gold, and who controlled the flow? Before you even step into the apoditarium, the changing room, you pass a squat wooden stand flanked by small amphorae. A boy no older than 13 stirs a thick amber-hued oil with a curved spoon. He eyes your arms, your shoulders, your slightly chapped knees. A bit of warmth for the joints, he asks. Behind him hangs a wooden sign carved with a subtle emblem, a winged flask circled by olive branches, the mark of the oil sellers' guild. In the Roman world, oil wasn't just for cooking. Inside the baths, it replaced soap. You'd rub it on, scrape it off with a strigil, and marvel at how it took the day's grime and yesterday's regrets with it. But where did all this oil come from? And how did it wind up here, inside this steamy sanctuary of the empire? Most Roman bathhouses had a contractual relationship with local oil merchants. These weren't fly-by-night vendors. They belonged to organized guilds, collegia recognized by the state, often protected by wealthy patrons. In cities like Ostia, inscriptions celebrate these guilds. To Marcus Petronius, master of the oil collegium, who kept the baths smooth and fragrant. Not exactly a war hero, but arguably more popular. Historians still argue whether these guilds functioned more like cooperatives or monopolies. Some evidence suggests the biggest ones controlled not just distribution, but production, owning olive groves, transport mules, and storage facilities. Others think they were simply well-organized traders pooling resources for better bargaining power. Either way, their influence was real. No oil, no bath. There was even a nickname for them, unguentarii. Technically, this meant perfumers, but in bathhouses, it often referred to the folks selling mixing or rationing oils. Some sold pre-mixed blends, lavender for muscle aches, myrrh for spiritual clarity, citrus to mask last night's wine. Others specialized in texture, light oils for young skin, heavy ones for the elders who'd earned every wrinkle. Prices fluctuated. A basic olive oil was cheap. Imported blends, especially from Hispania Baetica or the slopes of Crete, cost more. Add a rare scent, and suddenly you're spending like a senator. Some patrons brought their own oil, clutching tiny jewel-inlaid flasks, as if guarding secrets. Others relied on house blends, poured from large terracotta jars, and stirred throughout the day to keep from separating. Of course, wherever there's profit, there's politics. The guilds had rivals. Independent sellers tried to undercut prices or offer purer blends. In Pompeii, graffiti reads, "Varro's oil stinks, buy from Secundus" instead. Bathhouse staff sometimes took bribes to recommend one vendor over another. A smile from the towel boy could steer dozens of clients toward a preferred oil table. And then came the oil lockers. Yes, little wooden compartments rented out by the hour. You'd store your personal blend like a modern gym locker, but with more fragrance and less deodorant. Some elite bathhouses offered oil sommeliers who'd help you choose the right scent for the right occasion. Feeling tense? Try laurel with a touch of fennel. Nervous about a dinner party? Go with clove and pomegranate. One bronze tablet recovered near Herculaneum lists. Recommended ratios for blending. For pleasing the gods. For warming. Old bones. For softening the feet. It's less a recipe list and more a cultural snapshot. Oil wasn't just a product, it was personality, ritual, even philosophy. Some oil sellers passed their recipes down through generations. Families guarded their techniques, claiming their great-grandfather served Caesar's masseur. Others invented myths to boost sales. This oil was pressed during a lunar eclipse. It calms the humors. Did anyone believe it? Maybe. Was it profitable? Absolutely. And the logistics stunning. The oil often traveled hundreds of miles, carried in amphorae, loaded onto ships hauled by oxen. One misstep, a cracked jar, a moldy batch, and profit turned to loss. That's why bathhouses often had small storerooms, cool and dark, where oil could rest until needed. Some had elaborate filtering systems, cloth bags, fine sand to strain impurities. Romans were nothing, if not meticulous, when it came to luxury. You spot a woman with gold-threaded sleeves, handing a servant her empty flask. The servant refills it at a vendor's stand, adds a pinch of powdered resin, and seals it with wax. Even the wealthy didn't like to waste a drop. Oil wasn't spilled, it was savored. The vendors knew their audience. They offered small samples, ran quiet promotions. Buy 2 ladles, get a third free, and tailored their patter to the crowd. A merchant might hear about the invigorating effects of rosemary. A poet might be sold on the scent of Apollo's hillside. And the soldier's ointment, strong enough to soften a centurion's boots. You sit near one vendor, watching him stir a blend that glows golden in the flickering bathhouse light. He hums an old tune, scoops the oil with a carved ladle, and applies it to a client's back with a reverence usually reserved for sacred rituals. It's not just a product, it's a performance. And beneath it all, a river of coin flows. Daily, hourly, sometimes discreet, sometimes proud, but always there. Because in Rome, to bathe was to spend, and to shine was to show you could afford to. So next time you feel that silky warmth on your skin, remember it's not just oil. It's legacy. It's trade. It's a whisper of an empire running on olives and ambition. And yet oil was only the beginning. What about the simple things we take for granted, like a clean towel or a helpful hand, who made sure those tiny comforts were ready when you needed them? You're about to meet them. Imagine this. You've had your steam, your scrub, your oil massage. Now all you want is a soft towel, maybe a little help, drying off, and a quiet place to rest. But here's the twist. Even those final comforts come with a price tag. Who sets the rules of relaxation? And who gets the tip? You exit the caldarium skin, glistening, and limbs loose as jelly, only to be greeted by a queue. Yes, a queue for towels. Not everyone brought their own, and those who did are now wishing they hadn't, judging by the damp, sour-smelling linen bundles tucked under benches. A young man with a carefully folded stack of white cloths stands under a wooden sign, linens available. Coin first. No complaints. Roman towel culture. Now that's something the textbooks gloss over. Towels known as lintea or sudaria weren't complimentary in most public baths. They were part of a separate microeconomy, a kind of soft tax on your comfort. You paid to rent one and often tipped the towel boy to make sure it was actually dry. Historians still argue whether bathhouses charged for towels outright or used a deposit system. Some suggest wealthier patrons brought monogrammed cloths from home, like status symbol terry cloth. Others posit that certain balmy, smaller neighborhood-style baths offered towels as part of a bundled entry fee. But here, in the larger complexes, it's a separate transaction. One that made someone a lot of money. There were hierarchies even in linen. Coarser towels for the common crowds, softer ones sometimes perfumed for those who paid a little more. You glance to your left and see a particularly pampered-looking gentleman buried in a double-thick linen wrap. He's smiling. His servant is not likely the one who had to tip twice to reserve it in advance. It wasn't just about drying off. Towels were security blankets, privacy screens, fashion statements. Some patrons used them to distinguish themselves. Color-coded ends, decorative knots, or even stitched quotes. One fragment reads, "Better to drip in style than to soak in shame." An early motto for bathhouse influencers, perhaps. And yes, like everything else in the Roman world, there was theft. Towels went missing. Accusations flew. A famous anecdote from a satirist tells of a man who brought an eagle feather towel to the baths of Nero, only to find it swapped with a scratchy rag before he left the plunge pool. The towel boy swore innocence. The man swore loudly. To combat this, some bathhouses implemented numbered linen tokens. You'd receive a clay chip marked with a numeral, then exchange it for your towel. Misplace your token, and too bad, no refund, no sympathy. One inscription even warns, "He who loses his token shall dry himself with shame." A bit dramatic, but effective. And then there was the matter of tips. Tipping in Roman baths wasn't obligatory, but it was expected. And not just for towels. Want your locker guarded while you soak, tip. Want your sandals dried instead of left in a damp pile, tip. Want the linen boy to give you the softer towel, even if technically spoken, for tip, and smile. This created a strange economy of influence within the bathhouse staff. Some towel boys became minor celebrities, known by name, rumored to favor certain clients, maybe even slipping free upgrades to favored bathers. It wasn't unheard of for regulars to form friendships or quiet alliances with the linen staff. A good towel was worth the effort. Some bathhouses institutionalized this. Towel stations had ranking systems from novice folders to master linen stewards. The best got the choicest shifts and knew exactly who to wink at during busy hours. It was less laundry and more diplomacy. Others monetized it further by offering lintea aromatica, aromatically treated towels soaked in rosewater or myrtle essence. These were rare, expensive, and absolutely an upsell. A brief moment of sensory bliss, worth a few extra asses apparently. And it wasn't all business. Sometimes these towel attendants doubled as information hubs. Who arrived with whom? Who tipped well? Who complained they knew? They saw everything. And they talked quietly, but consistently. If you wanted the pulse of local gossip, you didn't ask the masseur. You asked the towel boy. Beyond towels, this tipping culture extended to nearly every minor luxury in the bath. Help retrieving a lost ring from the pool, drain tip. A dry spot on a crowded bench tip. Someone to hold your child while you soaked in peace, a generous tip. It created a fluid, informal marketplace within the formal structure of Roman bathing. Rules existed, but could always be softened with silver. And if you were stingy, people noticed. Attendants grew less helpful. Towels grew coarser. Your sandals somehow always ended up just a little too far from the bench. Social norms were enforced not through confrontation, but through gentle exclusion. Some wealthy patrons bypassed this entirely by bringing personal attendant slaves or hired bath servants, known as capsarii. These assistants carried linens, watched belongings, and handled all the awkward negotiations. But even they had to interact with the towel vendors occasionally, especially if the patron forgot to bring his own linen or desired something extra. The role of the capsarius deserves its own spotlight. Part valet, part butler, part gossip shield. He was essential to the upper-class bathing ritual. He knew when to tip how much and to whom. He also ensured the patron's towel wasn't just dry, but pre-warmed on a heated bench. That's five-star bath service. And for those without a capsarius, you learn to navigate the subtle rituals. Don't haggle too long. Smile, but not too broadly. Remember which towel boy gave you the good linen last time. Reward loyalty, and never ever take the last clean towel without tipping. What began as a simple act drying off became part of a broader culture of managed luxury, soft competition, and discreet hierarchy. The towel was your final impression, your parting note. Leave in a soggy rag, and that's how you'd be remembered. So, yes, in a world where even drying off had a price, you learned quickly that comfort wasn't free. It was earned, negotiated, and more often than not, tipped for. But what if you wanted even more than soft towels? What if you craved floral water, mood lighting, and the sweet scent of luxury itself drifting through the steam? Let's just say you're in for an aromatic surprise. Some rooms in the Roman bathhouse didn't just cleanse your skin, they seduced your senses. Why did rose petals drift on the surface of private pools? Who invented lavender-infused steam? And more importantly, who profited from these fragrant frills? The deeper into the baths you go, the more it smells like a business. You follow your nose quite literally to the caldarium's far alcove. The air is thicker here, warmer, sweeter, laced with something floral that doesn't seem native to this part of the empire. A pale mist curls from the open vents, and someone nearby sighs, not from heat or exhaustion, but from sheer sensory delight. Welcome to the realm of scented waters and aromatic add-ons, where the line between public service and elite indulgence becomes delightfully blurry. This isn't your everyday splash and scrub. This is curated, comfort-marketed mood and a distinctly Roman brand of luxurious upselling. Scented water wasn't new to Roman culture, but its formal introduction into public bathing rituals was something of a marketing coup. At first, it was a private indulgence, something used in elite villas, where rich women perfumed their baths with crushed herbs and imported flower oils. But once the public caught wind, literally, the demand soared. And bathhouse entrepreneurs got creative. One scroll from the reign of Hadrian, describes a special hour at the Baths of Titus, where myrtle-scented mist was pumped into the main chamber. Entry cost triple the usual fee, and yet the line wrapped around the atrium. Patrons were promised a divine experience, softer skin, clearer minds, and the envy of neighbors. Historians still argue whether any of that was true, but the profits were. Vendors soon followed. No longer satisfied selling basic oil, they developed complex perfume, balnearia bath perfumes. These were added to hot basins or misted into the air by attendants wielding long-handled ladles. You could order your scent at the door: jasmine for clarity, cinnamon for courage, chamomile if you'd overindulged the night before. Of course, none of this was free. These add-ons came with extra fees, and they weren't subtle. One enterprising bath in Alexandria offered scent tiers from humble lemongrass to what they called Caesarean rose, allegedly distilled from petals grown in imperial gardens. Whether the claim was true didn't matter. The image stuck, and people paid. You pass a side room where patrons recline on heated benches, eyes closed, surrounded by bowls of steaming herbal water. An attendant adds something from a pouch. The scent of sage and lemon balm rises like a spell. No one speaks. They're too busy basking in the illusion of being more than just clean, they're being elevated. And then there were the specialty treatments. Some bathhouses offered Florum Callida hot flower baths, where entire tubs were filled with floating petals. Not just for the wealthy women of Rome either. Men used them too, especially those looking to impress or simply indulge. One satirist described a senator swimming in daisies and pride. The suppliers of these floral indulgences operated almost like spice traders. Flowers were seasonal, perishable, and sometimes imported from as far as India or Nubia. Delivery had to be quick. Storage was risky. But the margins astounding. Dried herbs were cheap. Aromatic oils were not. That gap meant profit. Some bathhouses even advertised upcoming scent menus. Think of them as aromatic events. One surviving example from Carthage boasts this Saturnalia soak in saffron and sea fennel. 1 hour only. Special fee applies. It's a scent-based flash sale Roman style. There was also a competitive edge to the fragrance frenzy. If one bathhouse upgraded to steam infused with lavender, the next responded with sandalwood. Then came frankincense, orange peel, even pine from the Alps. A quiet arms race of smell, waged entirely through mist, and the crowd, they lapped it up. Roman culture prized sensory balance, and scent was no small part of that. The philosopher Seneca once noted that bathing restores not just the body, but the spirit. And it's likely he didn't mean plain water. Naturally, scent had its skeptics. Pliny the Elder grumbled about wasteful indulgences and perfumed fools who think a bath makes them better men. Yet even Pliny couldn't stop the trend. It was too lucrative, too embedded, too pleasant. Behind the scenes, this meant bathhouse staff needed new roles. Herb stewards measured and mixed. Vent attendants learned to regulate airflows to keep scents circulating. Some vendors sold take-home sachets of dried lavender or sandalwood beads, promising to extend the bath experience well into the afternoon. There were even signature blends, scents associated with particular baths, much like how modern hotels have their own ambient aromas. You could recognize a regular of the baths of Agrippa by the hint of vetiver on their towel. And it wasn't just about the water. Some wealthier baths offered incensum ambiental ambient incense burned in ornate brass holders shaped like dolphins or gods. These were placed in dry areas near benches or reading nooks. You'd sit soak in the smell and wonder whether you were relaxing or being gently marketed to. It worked. The scented bath wasn't just cleaner, it felt classier. And once the public got used to it, plain water seemed uninspired. Of course, not everyone could afford these extras. Basic admission rarely covered aromatics, so the scents became status markers. Smell like citrus, and you were trendy. Smell like rosemary, and you were either a philosopher or cheap. Smell like nothing at all, poor and possibly sick. You stroll toward the exit, passing one last vendor, ladling honeyed steam into a client's personal basin. The man nods approvingly, breathes deeply, and hands over 2 denarii, twice the cost of basic entry. It's not about being clean anymore. It's about being transported. And yet, beneath all this fragrance and flair, a question lingers: who's footing the real bill for this luxury? Who scrubs the flower-stained tiles and hauls the heavy amphorae behind the curtain of comfort? It's time to meet the invisible workforce keeping the bathhouse world turning. You've marveled at the mosaics soaked in rose-scented steam and tipped your towel boy like a seasoned local. But who pays for all this? Who designs the arches that reach toward the gods and funds the marble imported from 3 continents? The next time your foot hits a heated tile, ask yourself who's footing the real bill. As you step back into the main atrium, the scale of it hits you again. Massive vaulted ceilings, colossal columns, elaborate frescoes that seem painted just for your gaze. This isn't merely a bathhouse, it's a monument. And like any grand monument in Rome, it carries a price tag taller than its statues. The architecture of Roman baths was as much a financial statement as it was a feat of engineering. Every brick, every carved cornice, every dolphin-shaped spout served a dual purpose: to impress and to advertise. You weren't just getting clean here. You were walking through someone's resume. Let's begin with the emperors. They built the biggest and the boldest. The baths of Caracalla, of Diocletian, of Trajan. These weren't just public utilities. They were imperial declarations, loud and luxurious. Caracalla didn't build his bath to be helpful. He built it to be unforgettable, to awe you into loyalty. Historians still debate whether these emperors truly funded their baths out of generosity, or if it was just a clever distraction from political messes elsewhere. Some suggest Caracalla's bath-building spree followed a particularly unpopular tax. Others note that Trajan unveiled his bath complex shortly after a questionable military campaign. Coincidence? Maybe. Strategic timing? Definitely. But emperors weren't the only ones in the bathhouse game. Wealthy senators, merchants, retired generals, they all tried their hand at sponsorship. And why not? In a world without social media, putting your name on a massive dome was about the closest thing to going viral. Inscriptions were key. Near the entrance, you'd find carved marble plaques announcing who funded which part. Gaius Flavius paid for this caldarium, built with the generosity of Lucilla, minor trader in saffron. These weren't subtle. They were the ancient equivalent of donated by tags on museum walls, only bigger and far more permanent. And if you didn't have the funds to build your own bathhouse, no problem. You could sponsor a feature: a bench, a fountain, a new Hippocaust grate. Each contribution bought you a little bit of immortality. Your name forever steamed into the public memory. This created a competitive generosity. If one merchant funded a marble column, the next tried to outdo them with imported Greek sculptures. One noble might pay for a gilded mosaic, prompting another to install bronze taps shaped like hippocamps. The bathhouse became a gallery of one-upmanship. But here's where it gets clever. These donations weren't just for show They were tax deductible, well in a manner of speaking. Contributing to public works earned political clout, social favor, and sometimes even honorary titles. Some donors were rewarded with ceremonial office, their faces engraved on coins, their names shouted in public games, all from bankrolling a few pools and a steam vent. The architecture itself encouraged spending. The layout guided you from room to room, in a specific sequence, each chamber slightly more luxurious, slightly more expensive to maintain. It wasn't accidental. You were meant to feel a crescendo of grandeur. By the time you reached the hot bath under a painted dome, you were a believer in the Roman dream. Even the acoustics played a part. Certain rooms echoed with clarity designed to carry laughter, compliments, or perhaps whispered praise of the sponsor's name. Imagine relaxing in a warm pool while someone nearby muses aloud. Lucius certainly spared no expense. That's ROI Roman style. Behind the scenes, architects and engineers worked like modern contractors, juggling budgets, adapting to terrain, managing labor crews. Vitruvius, the famed Roman architect, wrote treatises on optimal bathhouse design, including airflow calculations and water routing. His guidelines ensured that even in luxury, function came first. A beautiful dome meant nothing if your tepidarium turned into a sauna by accident. Materials were sourced with care and cost. Marble from Greece or Egypt, bricks stamped with the name of the reigning emperor, pipes made of lead or bronze depending on your status sensitivity. Even the mortar could vary. Some complexes used crushed volcanic stone from Naples for added strength. That's a spa with seismic insurance. Construction employed legions, sometimes literally. Soldiers returning from campaigns were often tasked with public works as a form of service or punishment. They laid tiles, stacked bricks, and installed hypocaust pillars that carried heat beneath your feet. Your warm soak came courtesy of someone who once marched to Germania. And we can't forget the artists. Fresco painters, sculptors, tile workers, they all played a role. A particularly ornate bathhouse in Ephesus included ceiling mosaics so detailed that one observer wrote, "It is as if the gods themselves swim above us." Those gods came with a hefty invoice. Yet for all the expense, bathhouses were rarely profitable directly. Entry fees helped vendor payments too, but most baths ran at a loss. That wasn't the point. The point was influence, reputation, a physical legacy carved in stone, steam, and style. There were exceptions. Some private bathhouses, especially those attached to elite villas, charged guests or rented sections for events. A birthday steam, a retirement soak, a poetry reading, followed by a rosewater plunge. These events made money, but the big public baths, they were prestige projects. And what of maintenance? That's where it gets even pricier. Roof repairs, tile replacements, firewood for the hypocaust, ongoing costs that required steady funding. Some baths had endowments, donations set aside to cover future expenses. Others relied on continued generosity or gentle political pressure. It would be most unfortunate if the caldarium were to close this winter, wouldn't it? Senator, it's all a dance of wealth and public need of luxury, disguised as generosity. And somehow it works. You sit in a marble alcove, water gently lapping your ankles, admiring a ceiling painted with golden nymphs. You don't know the architect's name, but the patron, it's chiseled right above your head. Still as dazzling as these walls are, the real machinery hums elsewhere. Hidden corridors, roaring furnaces, sweating workers. If luxury has a face, then labor has a heartbeat, and it's time you listen to it. They never appear in the frescoes. No statues honor them. But without these workers, the baths would fall cold and silent, who hauled the firewood, polished the marble, and swept away the oily footprints of senators. What does luxury look like when viewed from the furnace room? You slip through a side passage, narrow, low-ceilinged, warm in a different way, not soothing, but stifling. The scent shifts from floral steam to charred ash and damp cloth. A heavy door creaks open, and just like that, you're behind the scenes. Welcome to the engine room of Rome's comfort. The hypocaust, that brilliant Roman underfloor heating system, doesn't run on magic. It runs on sweat, mostly from slaves and low-status laborers, whose job it was to keep the fires burning literally. These furnaces, called prefurnia, were fed a relentless diet of wood and coal day and night. The goal? Keep the floors hot, the water flowing, and the illusion seamless. The men who tended them, often shackled to the job by birth debt or conquest, worked in stifling heat with little visibility and no glory. Covered in soot, stripped to tunics, they moved like shadows beneath your feet. One historian described their world as the underbelly of leisure, a perfect phrase for this hidden layer of Roman life. They weren't alone. The bathhouse required an entire crew. There were floor scrubbers, oil collectors. Yes, oil scraped from skin was gathered and repurposed, waste not want, not bucket haulers, towel washers, and even spongers who cleaned the latrines. These jobs weren't glamorous, but they were essential. Historians still argue about the precise numbers involved. A major bath complex like the Baths of Caracalla may have required hundreds of workers to operate at peak. Even small neighborhood baths employed dozens. Staff roles were layered. Some were owned slaves, others rented laborers. A few were paid freemen seeking stable work. One job rarely mentioned in surviving texts is the testiciarius, the tile floater. Their job was to check the floating tiles over the hypocaust to ensure they weren't cracking or settling. If a tile failed, the hot airflow would be disrupted. And if the floor collapsed during a crowded soak, a disaster. Testiciari were part janitor, part engineer, part emergency technician. The work was punishing. The furnaces needed constant attention. Water levels had to be maintained, drains unclogged, fires stoked. Imagine lifting baskets of coal into a roaring brick oven, while bathers above complain the tepidarium feels a degree too cool. And the floors, marble though they were, didn't stay pristine by magic. After each session, teams of scrubbers would move in with brushes and cloths, often mixing water with vinegar or herbal solutions to remove oil's footprints and stray petals. If a patron slipped, the staff would be blamed, not the perfume vendor. Some bathhouses employed what we might now call feedback staff watchers, who walked the floors, noting leaks, overheated benches, or sullen clients. They'd report back to the balneater, the bath manager, who coordinated repairs and soothed egos. The balneater wasn't a slave usually, more like a middle manager in sandals. Then came the capsari, whom we've mentioned before. While some were upscale attendants, others were glorified guards tasked with preventing theft from lockers or monitoring belongings. If a tunic or ring went missing, suspicion fell on them first. And what of the washers? The towel laundering process was its own grueling operation. Towels were boiled, scrubbed, dried over racks, and sometimes bleached, using substances that would make a modern chemist raise an eyebrow, like urine. That's right. Roman laundries, or philoniki, used ammonia-rich urine as a natural bleach. Towels returned clean, if not exactly fragrant. Still, there was pride in the work. Some laborers carved small graffiti into the walls of hidden rooms, initials, doodles, prayers, to keep the fire steady or prevent foot blisters. One scribble in a bathhouse in Gaul reads, "Heat for them, smoke for us." Short, bitter poetic. Occasionally, a worker rose through the ranks. A freedman who served faithfully might become a balneater, or even manage multiple bathhouses. There's at least one tombstone dedicated to a man who oversaw a full balney crew in the port city of Ostia. His epitaph notes, "He never let the water cool." A true compliment in his field, yet most remained invisible. Guests floated from one scented room to the next, unaware of the laborers beneath them. Even the architects often omitted servants' passages and quarters from official floor plans as if admitting their existence spoiled the ambiance. But they were there, with cracked hands, sweaty brows, bent backs, hauling coal-scrubbing grime, collecting leaky oil jars. Their labor turned bathhouses into sanctuaries. Their effort allowed poets to wax lyrical about mist and marble while never mentioning the mop. One historian theorizes that the grandeur of Roman baths was deliberately theatrical. Like a stage play, it wasn't meant to show the crew behind the curtain. Guests were the audience, and the bathhouse staff. They were stagehands in perpetual blackout. And yet, in their own quiet ways, these workers left marks. A handprint in soot on a furnace wall. A carved dolphin hidden under a stair. A tool stashed in a hollow column with a name scratched into the handle. Tiny acts of permanence in a system that offered little else. So the next time you soak in warmth or sigh over a well-swept floor, imagine the people who made it happen, not with applause, but with ash on their skin and rhythm in their steps. And if the front lines of comfort were powered by human hands, what about the back-end supply chains, who shipped the oil, delivered the herbs, stocked the firewood? Behind the walls, another world bustled. It's time to take a walk through Rome's logistical labyrinth. You've seen the marble smelled, the oils, felt the heat, but where did it all come from? The olive oil, the cedar logs, the saffron sprigs floating in scented baths. What invisible hands delivered Rome's daily comforts on time every time the answers are woven through roads, ships, and smoke? Behind the humming elegance of every bathhouse was a supply chain running with military precision and marketplace flair. You step through a small back gate near the furnace room and enter a different Rome. No mosaics, no nymphs, just courtyards piled with crates, amphorae, and busy men shouting over the bray of mules. This is the area Balnai the service zone, not marked on any tourist itinerary, but without it the front-of-house experience would collapse like an overheated tile. It's not glamorous, but oh, is it essential. Start with water. Bathhouses used a staggering amount of it, hundreds of thousands of liters per day in the largest complexes. Some were fortunate enough to be built near natural springs, but many relied on aqueducts masterworks of Roman engineering that carried fresh water from distant hills. The Aqua Marcia, for example, fed both homes and public baths across the city thanks to cleverly positioned lead pipes and distribution tanks. Historians still debate how baths were prioritized during shortages. Some argue emperors ensured bathhouses stayed filled to keep the people calm. Others claim more elite areas got water first, while smaller neighborhood baths ran dry. Either way, water logistics weren't just about plumbing, they were politics. Then came the fuel. The Prefernium fires demanded a steady supply of wood charcoal and occasionally coal. In cities, this meant constant deliveries via ox-drawn carts. Some bathhouses maintained their own woodlots on nearby land. Others relied on contracts with local forest stewards, or even military depots, especially in colder regions. The firewood wasn't just dumped randomly. It had to be sorted, dried, stacked in specific patterns. Damp logs were inefficient. Charcoal, more compact and hotter, was prized but expensive. Coal, when used, was unpopular for its heavy smoke, though some coastal baths tolerated it thanks to favorable wind patterns. And that olive oil. It didn't just flow in from magical jars. It arrived in amphorae sealed with wax and often marked with stamps from Baetica Tripolitania or Crete. The wealthiest bathhouses could request specific blends. Others took whatever the market offered. A well-run facility kept a rotating stock fresh oil in the front, older inventory used first. Deliveries were scheduled with military care. A slip-up meant patrons left dry-skinned and disappointed. Contracts outlined volumes, weights, and delivery times. One surviving tablet from a bath near Lugdunum reads, 2 amphorae of second press oil to be delivered before midday. Penalty for lateness, 3 denarii. Even then, lateness cost you. Other supplies were just as vital. Herbs for scented rooms came in bundles wrapped in cloth or packed in crates lined with straw. Myrtle, rosemary, bay leaves each had its season. Some were local. Others, especially rarer aromatics like cinnamon or frankincense, traveled from far-off provinces or arrived via maritime trade. In coastal cities, bathhouses often had loading docks or rear entrances facing ports. Goods came in by boat were transferred to carts, then rushed through alleys before the morning soak rush. Workers moved like ants, quiet, fast, coordinated. And the laundry, a logistical challenge all its own. Soiled towels, cloths, and tunics were hauled to nearby Fulinikai laundries that specialized in large batch cleaning. A good laundry crew had routes timed with bathhouse cycles. Morning loads came back by afternoon. One misplaced basket meant a domino effect of damp, disappointed clients. Even scents had suppliers. Perfumed oils arrived in fragile flasks, often triple-wrapped and transported in padded crates. Some bathhouses developed relationships with perfumers who delivered custom blends like a Roman subscription box, but for your nose. Then there were the little things, strigil scraping bowls, bronze fixtures. These came from blacksmiths, pottery shops, or traveling tool vendors. A crack in a basin or a broken spout couldn't wait. Bathhouses had small storerooms stocked with replacements, and some kept an on-call smithy nearby. At the top of this tangled hierarchy was the procurator balneae, the bath's logistics manager. He, or more rarely, she was in charge of inventory supplier relations quality control. If the towels were scratchy or the oil smelled odd, the procurator heard about it. Their records were meticulous. Wax tablets marked with lists, firewood check. Water flow steady. Scent rotation, lavender. Today, mint tomorrow. Even food vendors were regulated. Patrons didn't see this part of the operation, but they benefited from it every second. Historians often compare the Roman bath complex to a modern hotel or resort, and it's a fair comparison. Behind the polished facade, a small army worked to keep things perfect. Failures weren't just inconvenient, they were reputational. A cold plunge pool was a scandal. A dirty floor, social suicide. Of course, corruption crept in. Suppliers cut corners. Amphorae were watered down. Charcoal deliveries sometimes included stones to increase weight. One clever merchant filled the bottom of a herb crate with dry weeds. He was found out mainly because someone tried to steep the rosemary and ended up with a stinging rash. Still, most of the system worked because it had to. The bath wasn't optional. It was culture, ritual, daily necessity. And behind every steamy sigh and scented splash was a network of roads, rivers, and handshakes making it all possible. You return to the main complex, now knowing what's behind the marble. Every towel passed through a courtyard. Every scent sailed in from another shore. Every drop of heat began as a crackling log stacked by someone who'd never once seen the frescoes he kept warm. And yet, not all trades in the bathhouse were scheduled or legal. Beyond the storerooms and supply lists, other exchanges took place. Quiet ones, risky ones, and they didn't always involve towels. Let's lift the curtain on Rome's steamier whispers. Let's play a game. You walk into the Roman baths for a simple soak, but a whisper catches your ear. A handshake lasts just a little too long. A small pouch changes hands near the steam vent. Are these just friendly favors? Or something less above board? In the shadows of the caldarium, not every transaction is on the ledger. You wander back into the main chamber, but now with new eyes. You've seen the vendors, the linen staff, the logistical ballet. It all feels perfectly legal. But beneath the scent of rosewater and the splash of heated pools, there's another rhythm pulsing through the walls, quieter, subtler, and far harder to trace. Roman bathhouses were public spaces, yes, but they were also private ones. They were the rare places where people of different classes mingled freely, sometimes half-dressed, often distracted. That made them perfect, not only for commerce, but for confidential commerce. Historians still argue how much illicit trade really took place in the baths. The records are few, often secondhand anecdotes or satire, but the tone is telling. Writers like Marshall and Juvenal hint at secret meetings near the steam at deals made between towels. Nothing outright, of course. That would have ruined the mystery. So what kind of black market activity could possibly exist inside a place built for bathing? Start with stolen goods. The constant flow of people clothes left unattended, and general humidity made baths a magnet for thieves. Capsari were tasked with guarding lockers, but they couldn't catch everything. One quick hand could relieve a patron of a ring, a coin pouch, or a silk sash, especially if the thief had a friend distract the staff with a fake complaint about slippery steps. But stealing wasn't the only underground economy. Bathhouses were prime ground for off-the-books lending. Need a short-term loan without visiting a moneylender's stall. Whisper your rate in the caldarium. Reputation mattered more than contracts. If you bathed at the same time every day, you were easy to find. If you vanished after borrowing, word spread fast, and Rome's gossip network was faster than any postal system. Information brokering also thrived here, with senators, merchants, and military officers soaking side-by-side ears were always open. Slaves sometimes served as unofficial informants, relaying overheard deals to employers or rivals. A few were paid handsomely for this kind of intel. More than one lawsuit or business scandal likely began in the tepidarium. Then there were banned items, exotic herbs, rare perfumes, unofficial potions that guaranteed youth or improved performance in various fields. These weren't sold at vendor stalls. They were offered quietly, maybe after a compliment, maybe from the folds of a damp robe. Payment was subtle, delivery often outside the gates. One marble tablet from near Ostia makes veiled reference to a seller of fish and secrets punished for disrupting the peace of a public bath. No one knows exactly what he sold, but historians love the ambiguity. Some bathhouses became known for this undercurrent. Not openly, of course, but certain times of day, certain corners of the complex drew certain kinds of clientele. A merchant with questionable goods might sit a little too long by the massage bench. A scribe rumored to forge property documents might hum an oddly catchy tune near the plunge pool, his version of an office hours bell. And while it wasn't exactly illegal, matchmaking of both romantic and transactional kinds flourished too. Looking for a business partner, a political ally, a friend of a friend with influence at the governor's office. Ask around the frigidarium tip well, and someone might arrange a warm conversation later that week. Bathhouse staff weren't just witnesses to this economy they sometimes participated. An oil boy might pass notes between feuding clients. A towel vendor might run side deals on imported lotions. And the balneater, he almost certainly knew. It was his house after all. Better to keep things discreet than to drive the whispers elsewhere. There's even evidence that some bathhouses kept unofficial ledgers not of illegal activity exactly, but of services traded that never went through official channels. A massage in exchange for laundry, a backroom oil blend for a promised favor. Rome thrived on reciprocity, and the baths were no exception. But there were limits. Too much illicit activity, and a bathhouse risked intervention. Local magistrates occasionally raided known hotspots, not always to prosecute, but to remind everyone who was in charge. One edict from the early 3rd century forbids the transaction of contracts exceeding 5 sesterces within public waters. Ambiguous enough to be mostly symbolic, but pointed enough to chill certain conversations. Most patrons knew where the line was. Some danced on it, a few tripped, but the bathhouse economy, both above and below the marble, relied on this balance. Discretion, not denial. Subtlety, not secrecy. You settle back on a warm bench, eyes half-lidded watching as 2 men nod at each other over a shared oil flask. Their voices are low, their smiles practiced. Whatever's being traded, it's not just fragrance, and no one around them seems surprised. Because in the Roman baths, commerce didn't end with soap and towels. It whispered through the steam, danced behind draped curtains, and left behind no receipt-only stories. And not far from here, another kind of transaction awaits, one involving health healing and sometimes hope. But are these bathhouse doctors truly curing ailments, or simply selling dreams? Step carefully. Now someone's left a bundle of dried herbs by the bench, and a man in a soot-colored robe is chanting softly near the hot basin. Is this a bathhouse or a clinic? And what exactly is floating in that bowl of steaming water? Whether you sought healing or just hoped not to sneeze, the Roman baths promised treatments of all kinds. You pass through the caldarium's far chamber and into a quieter space. The tiles here are cooler, the chatter hushed. A bronze plaque on the wall reads, "Sanitas per aquam, health through water." That motto isn't just philosophical, it's a business plan. For centuries, Romans believed that the baths had curative powers, not just hygienic benefits, but real physical healing. Steam opened pores, sweat expelled bad humors, and cold plunges shocked the system back to balance. Add a few herbs and some confident advice, and you had the perfect formula for wellness and revenue. Enter the bathhouse healers. Some were genuine doctors, trained in Galenic theory, versed in anatomy, and proud of their scroll collections. Others were specialists, a polite word for herbalists, dream interpreters, and practitioners of suspiciously vague arts. They didn't wear white coats. They wore confidence and carried scented satchels. You spot one now, a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard and a robe too clean to be in attendance. He's massaging a man's neck with oil while murmuring about blocked warmth and rising damp. Whether that's an actual diagnosis or poetic nonsense is unclear. But the man looks relaxed, and he's already reaching for his coin pouch. Healing in Roman baths operated on a spectrum. At one end, licensed physicians set up tables near the quieter rooms, offering diagnoses, cupping, and wound cleaning. At the other, mystics claimed to balance energies, whisper prayers, or interpret which gods were upset based on how your shoulders felt. And then there were the herbal vendors. With belts full of pouches and tongues full of promises, they sold solutions for everything: muscle cramps, poor digestion, even anxiety. Though Romans didn't have that word yet. They called it angustiae animae, the narrowing of the soul. It sounds fancier, doesn't it? These treatments weren't free. A basic consultation might cost a few asses. Add a treatment like a mulled wine tonic or a licorice steam wrap, and you were suddenly paying as much as a full meal at a decent tavern. But patrons paid because health was priceless, and a little luxury wrapped in eucalyptus never hurt. Historians still debate how effective these services were. Some physicians likely helped real ailments, sprains, skin issues, fevers. Others probably did more harm than good. The line between science and showmanship was like the bath mist constantly shifting. One famous anecdote tells of a healer named Fuscus who claimed he could align a man's humors using only sound vibrations and foot baths. His treatments involved humming near the ankles and pouring warm lavender oil down the spine. Did it work? Unclear. Did he become wealthy? Very. Some bathhouses leaned into the wellness image hard. They advertised healing waters even if they piped in the same water as every other place on the block. Certain springs were said to cure specific complaints. One in Cumae allegedly helped eyesight. Another near Narbo was good for joint pain, though it mostly smelled like sulfur. More elite baths had private cubicles for treatments. Heated slabs perfumed air one-on-one attention. You'd emerge reeking of fennel and confidence. For the very wealthy, this became routine, a weekly recalibration of body and spirit. Doctors made house calls, but mystics preferred the steamy stage of the bathhouse. Not all clients believed equally. Some came to humor their friends. Others swore by their chosen healer and visited no one else. The bathhouse became a kind of therapeutic marketplace, one where results were optional but appearances mattered. Even public officials took part. Inscriptions survive praising Medici balneari bath doctors employed by the city to tend to public health. One such medicus was honored with a marble plaque for easing the joints of 100 veterans. He probably also knew how to soothe a sore ego. And the tools, fascinating. Some healers carried bronze cupping jars, curved blades for minor procedures, or bundles of herbs tied with red string. One had a necklace of carved bone pieces, each representing a different ailment. It's unclear whether he used them diagnostically or just liked the clatter. Of course, not every bathhouse welcomed healers. Some restricted them to certain hours or rooms. Others required a cut of their earnings, and a few banned them entirely, citing complaints about smoke chanting or unsolicited opinions about bowel health. Still, they found ways in. Healing had a mystique, a romance. People wanted to believe that a bath could do more than cleanse, it could cure. And in a time when medical science was often guesswork, wrapped in expensive linen, sometimes belief was enough. You recline against the warm wall, breathing in something vaguely minty. A woman nearby thanks her healer with a small kiss on the hand and a folded pouch of herbs. He bows deeply, then vanishes into the steam, already scanning the crowd for the next client with a creaky elbow or a wounded pride. So next time you think of spa day as a modern luxury, remember that 2,000 years ago, Romans were already buying wellness by the drop and hoping the man with the smooth voice and sandal pouch had just enough magic to make them feel new. But not everyone came to the baths for treatments or even tranquility. Some came to gamble, to test fate place bets, and maybe leave with more than just damp sandals. Yes, even in the bathhouse, Romans loved a wager. They weren't supposed to. Technically, the baths were for relaxation, not risk-taking. But rules soften in steam, and coins make friends quickly. Why were men huddled around a marble bench, whispering numbers, what slipped from robe to hand beneath the warm haze? Welcome to Rome's steamiest side hustle, bathhouse betting. You pass through a low archway into a corner chamber just off the tepidarium, where the tiles are slightly worn and the benches unusually close together. No vendors here, no perfumed oil. Just quiet murmurs, occasional laughter, and a clatterbones on tile. Not the skeletal kind, the gaming kind. Romans gambled just about everywhere at taverns, festivals, roadside inns, but the bathhouse offered something special: time proximity and distraction. What better place to place a wager than while waiting for a friend to finish his strigil routine? The air is warm, the attendants are discreet, and the stakes are as fluid as the steam. Games took many forms. Dice games were the most popular, especially tali and alea. The tali knucklebones carved from sheep or cast in ivory weren't quite dice as we know them, but served a similar purpose. Each side had a different value, and players competed for the highest scoring combinations. Losers groaned. Winners smiled and pretended it was skill. It rarely was. Some bathhouse patrons carried their own tesserae small betting tokens, exchanged for coin later. This reduced the sound of clinking money, kept things quieter, and gave plausible deniability. Oh no, we're not gambling, one might say. Just playing a little strategy game with decorative counters. Of course, coins still changed hands. Usually discreetly slipped beneath a towel passed in an oil pouch, or exchanged behind the thin curtain that divided the warm bench from the massage nook. Attendants often looked away, sometimes for politeness, sometimes because they had a stake in the outcome. Historians still argue how widespread bathhouse gambling really was. Some claim it was rare and frowned upon. Others suggest it was common, even expected, particularly in more urban or elite settings where leisure was long and private alcoves plentiful. There's at least one surviving graffito from a bath near Pompeii that reads Felix won 4 denarii in the tepidarium. He owes Brutus a cup of wine. Lighthearted, maybe, but proof that coins moved alongside water, and it wasn't all dice. Some patrons bet on trivia naming Greek poets, guessing the next consul appointment, predicting chariot race outcomes. Others wagered on feats of strength, like who could withstand the hot room the longest, or who could toss a pebble closest to a specific tile crack. One clever bathhouse even installed a tiny ring toss contraption in a corner, a stone dolphin with an open mouth, and a small bronze hoop. Patrons would flip rings from a seated position. Whoever landed 3 in a row won a towel upgrade. Probably unofficial, probably popular. For the bathhouse staff, these games offered opportunity. Some served as referees. Others acted as lookouts, warning when a magistrate or stern elder approached. A few likely skimmed a fee, 10% of winnings, for protection services. Rome's version of the house edge. Yet there were limits. If games got too loud or attracted too large a crowd, a balneater might intervene. Or worse, a local official could be summoned. Gambling wasn't exactly illegal, but it was regulated. Public order mattered. So the games stayed small, quiet woven into the casual rhythm of the bath. That said, some patrons took things seriously. Stories tell of friendships soured over bets, oil flasks smashed in frustration, even an impromptu wrestling match over a disputed role. The latter was allegedly ended by a bucket of cold water from a very annoyed water boy. And not all players were equal. A senator could afford to lose a few denarii. A merchant's apprentice, less so. But here, in the towel-draped semi-democracy of the baths, everyone rolled the same bones. Status paused briefly over shared risk and silent calculation. Some historians even suggest that bathhouse gambling served a social function, a way to bond, to settle debts, to pass time without awkward conversation. Like small talk, but with stakes. You might not discuss politics with your fellow bather, but you might bet on how many times the oil vendor tripped today. And of course, some used it to signal wealth. Winning wasn't always the point. Betting large sums, laughing at losses, tossing a coin to an attendant, just because these gestures built reputation faster than any perfumed oil. As you sit on a warm bench, a young man across the way rolls a bone die and chuckles. His companion groans, hands over a token, and mutters something about switching gods. They aren't hiding it, but they aren't announcing it either. It's all part of the rhythm. Gambling in the Roman baths wasn't loud, brash, or wild. It was subtle, sly, and soaked in etiquette. A nod, a roll, a win, and then back to soaking. But not everyone came to the baths just to soak or bet. Some traveled for days, across provinces drawn by rumors of healing waters and legendary comforts. For these bathhouse pilgrims, the soak was only the beginning. Who were these ancient spa tourists, and what happened to the towns that welcomed them? The man next to you speaks with an unfamiliar accent. His robe is too heavy for this region, and his sandals have dust from roads you've never walked. Why would someone travel hundreds of miles just to sit in a warm pool? What drew them here, and who profited when they arrived? Welcome to the ancient world of spa tourism. Even in antiquity, certain bathhouses acquired reputations that stretched far beyond their local forums. Travelers came not just for healing, but for prestige. To bathe in the same water as a governor, a philosopher, or someone rumored to be blessed by Apollo. That was worth the journey. You meet one such traveler near the apoditarium. He's unrolling a thin linen bundle and chatting with a local towel boy about road conditions in the hills near Aquae Sulis, a famed spa town in what's now Bath, England. His tone is proud. He's made the trip. His joints still ache, but his spirits are high. Historians note a subtle shift in Roman travel during the imperial era. Trade and military posts remained key reasons for movement, but leisure began to make its mark too. Bathhouses weren't just convenient stops. They became destinations. Take Baiae near Naples. Once a quiet coastal retreat, it exploded into a glittering playground known for its luxurious thermal baths. Emperors owned villas there. Poets praised its healing fog. Tourists arrived by boat, foot, or carriage, and not all of them returned the same. Spa towns developed entire microeconomies. Inns popped up around the bath complex. Vendors sold souvenirs, small flasks carved strigils, scented oils bottled at the source. Some even claim to capture bath vapors in ceramic jars meant to be uncorked back home for a whiff of wellness. And food. Oh, yes. Restaurants and snack vendors tailored their menus to weary travelers, nut pastes, soft breads, spiced wines said to help with sleep or circulation. One tavern near the baths, at Clusium, had a house specialty called Vinum Balnearium bathing wine. Whether it helped or just got people talking, it definitely sold. Accommodation ranged from modest guest houses to opulent villas rented out to traveling elites. Some lodgings even offered their own mini baths, marketing them as private preludes to the public waters. These early spa resorts knew their audience. One marble inscription from a bathhouse in Gaul reads, "Here bathed Marcus, who came from Cyrene and found health." It's part travel brag, part Yelp review. Others scratch graffiti on the walls. "Second time here, better than Baetica," or "The oil boy with the dimple still remembers me." Not all spa tourists were wealthy. Veterans, pilgrims, and merchants also made the trip, often pooling funds or staying in temple housing near sacred springs. Some traveled with families. Others came alone, seeking relief from ailments modern science would diagnose as everything from arthritis to simple exhaustion. And the locals, they adjusted. Towns near major bathhouses learned to speak fragments of many dialects, hiked prices during festival seasons, and created layered pricing systems, one rate for locals, another for visiting shoulders. Some bathhouse managers even employed greeters fluent in multiple tongues. Their job was part translator, part cultural concierge. If you arrived from across the empire, someone would make sure you knew where to store your sandals, how to tip discreetly, and which oil not to buy if you had sensitive skin. Spa tourism also brought fame to certain physicians and healers. A respected bathhouse doctor could attract patients from distant cities. One scroll tells of Cassia of Ephesus, a midwife and herbalist so beloved that mothers traveled with newborns to have her bless them in warm water. Whether she blessed or simply bathed them is unclear, but the legend grew. Bathhouses started leaning into their reputations. Murals depicted distant travelers arriving. Inscriptions listed famous visitors. One even kept a guest book of sorts, etched in stone, of course, with names and short messages from patrons who'd come from as far as the Red Sands or beyond the olives of Numidia. And when visitors returned home, they carried the bathhouse story with them. A merchant might name his shop Thermae Treasures. A matron might host lavender steam gatherings in the style of Aquae Sextiae. Bathhouse culture became portable franchise through memory and mimicry. But with popularity came pressure. Larger crowds meant more strain on water supplies, more noise, more complaints. Some towns regulated spa hours or created separate spaces for locals and visitors. Others embraced the chaos more bathers, after all, meant more coin. And not all travelers were respectful. One inscription warns, "Those who foul the water shall bathe next in wine and pay for both." Whether that was literal or poetic is up for debate. Even the emperors played tourist. Hadrian visited multiple spa towns, sometimes incognito. One legend claims he once posed as a merchant just to hear what people really thought of a new tepidarium design. If true, it speaks volumes about how seriously Rome took its thermal experience. As you sit once more in a rose-scented pool, a new group enters the chamber, sunburned, travel-worn, wide-eyed. They pause, look around, and smile. They've arrived. Their journey ends here in the warmth, the chatter, the gently rising steam. But not all Romans embraced this bustling shared soak. Some craved exclusivity, privacy, prestige, without the crowd? What if the public bath wasn't quite posh enough? Get ready to explore Rome's earliest answer to VIP culture. The curtain sways but doesn't invite. A servant stands guard. Behind him, muffled laughter and the splash of private water echo softly. Who gets to bathe beyond velvet ropes? When did the bathhouse stop being public and start becoming personal? Step quietly. You're about to glimpse Rome's private bathing elite. In theory, Roman baths were for the people shared open civic. But as with all things, Roman status crept in like steam under a door. Wealthy citizens, ever eager to separate themselves from the crowd, began carving out their own corners of comfort. The result, the rise of private bathing clubs. These weren't merely nicer baths. They were different in purpose, design, and atmosphere. Some were attached to private homes, grand villas with their own mini-thermi. Others operated as exclusive clubs, admission by invitation or membership fee, where elites could escape the splashy chaos of public baths and enjoy a more tailored experience. You find yourself walking along the edge of such a space now. It looks like any other doorway until you notice the polished bronze handles, the floral mosaics more intricate than the main halls, and the subtle scent of imported frankincense wafting from within. Inside, it's quieter. No vendors hawking oil. No dice bouncing on tiles. Just a few men and women reclining on benches, robes, looser, voices low. This isn't just bathing, it's networking. Deals are being discussed, marriages arranged, literature recited, and all of it out of earshot of the general populace. Historians suggest these private bathing rooms, balnea, privata, emerged during the late Republic and flourished under the Empire. Some were carved into existing public bathhouses, partitioned with elegant screens or velvet curtains. Others were standalone facilities, funded by patrons who preferred exclusivity to grandeur. Membership came with perks, better towels, personalized oil blends, first pick of the heating schedule. Some clubs even maintained dedicated staff who remembered your scent preference, your preferred water temperature, and how many pillows you liked under your head. Of course, not just anyone could join. A hefty donation, a strong patron, or a particularly flattering bust in the atrium might get you in. But for most, these doors stayed closed, quiet symbols of wealth's quietest power, privacy. The architecture of private baths reflected this. Smaller pools, finer tiles, softer acoustics. One villa near Pompeii had a laconicum, a dry sweat room lined entirely with rose-colored marble and capped with a domed skylight. Light poured in, but only on the invited. Even the heating was tailored. Instead of vast hypocaust systems struggling to warm giant chambers, these smaller spaces use focused furnace design. You didn't have to wait for the caldarium to heat up. You were the caldarium's reason to exist. And food, naturally. Some clubs offered hot snacks and sweet wine. One inscription mentions almond cakes and honeyed figs served with steam. More spa cafe than civic bath. One unique feature of certain clubs was the private dressing assistant. Not a slave, but a paid attendant who helped you undress, folded your clothes neatly, and offered conversation while you waited. Think of it as concierge hospitality in a tunic. Some private clubs hosted themed evenings, philosophical debates by lamplight, poetry readings in the frigidarium, even miniature theatrical performances staged in dry rooms with heated floors. Invitations were handwritten, sealed with wax, and handed to you, never mailed. Of course, this exclusivity didn't go unnoticed. Satirists mocked the rich for bathing away from the people who made them rich. One poem reads, "Their waters are scented, their benches are silk. Their hearts, however, remain lukewarm." Clever and a bit bitter. But for the elite, the appeal was real. Fewer eyes, fewer interruptions, and more control. In public baths, you might overhear gossip. In private ones, you started it. Some bathhouse clubs even had their own small libraries. Scroll racks lined with Virgil Ovid and the latest scandalous drama. You'd soak snack and read a truly Roman version of wellness. And let's not forget politics. Bathhouse clubs weren't just about comfort. They were power hubs. Senators lobbied each other in warm pools. Businessmen shook damp hands over property deals. Ambassadors whispered strategy while sipping spiced wine. Membership could even be a political tool. A governor might grant access as a reward, or revoke it as a punishment. A quiet demotion wrapped in scented towels. Yet for all their exclusivity, private baths still relied on the same mechanics water from the aqueduct wood for the furnace's staff to scrub and prep. Behind the scenes, it was labor as usual. But out front, it was curated perfection. You pass through the corridor once more, the curtain swinging gently behind you. The laughter fades. The marble underfoot feels cooler. And suddenly, the public bath, noisy, busy, democratic, feels a bit more alive. Still, even private luxury can't stop time. Eventually, even the warmest water runs cold. And what happens when the fountains dry up? The firewood goes unstacked, and the velvet ropes fall. We're nearing the end now. Let's take a final walk into the quiet, crumbling echoes of the empire's last bath. It doesn't happen all at once. The baths don't close with a dramatic clang or a tearful farewell. First, the steam fades a little sooner each day. Then the vendors stop showing up. And finally, someone notices that the water is cold and has been for weeks. What happens when an empire's favorite pastime simply stops? The fall of Roman bath culture wasn't a single event. It was a long, gradual unraveling, woven into the broader decline of the empire itself. Economics invasions, urban decay, shifting values, all played their part in cooling the water. You walk into a bathhouse now, not the bustling, fragrant sanctuaries of old, but a shell. The mosaic floors are chipped. A statue of Venus leans slightly to the left vines, curling around her ankles. The echo that once carried laughter now just repeats your footsteps. In the late Empire, the costs of maintaining these architectural giants became overwhelming. As state funds tightened and urban infrastructure crumbled, many baths fell into disrepair. Aqueducts, once the veins of Roman hygiene, were sabotaged by invaders or simply collapsed from neglect. With no fresh water, the baths went silent. Historians still argue which cause mattered most. Some point to the Gothic and Vandal invasions, which disrupted supply chains and destroyed key cities. Others cite economic decline. Fewer tax revenues meant fewer public works. Budgets and bathhouses were among the first luxuries cut. Yet the change wasn't just material, it was cultural. As Christianity spread through the empire, attitudes toward bathing shifted. While early Christians did bathe and even built their own bath complexes, the association of Roman baths with leisure nudity and sometimes pagan rituals led to a slow withdrawal of elite support. You find a record from 5th century Gaul. It describes a once grand bath turned into a sheep stable. Another mentions a bishop converting the frigidarium into a chapel. Sacred water replaced scented water. In Rome itself, some baths limped along, offering reduced services cold, only soaks no more oil vendors or fresh towels. The grand baths of Caracalla survived longer than most their sheer size, giving them a kind of inertia. But eventually, even they fell quiet. One traveler in the 6th century wrote of seeing the ruins. The floors are wild gardens now. The echoes speak, but no one answers. A poetic way to say the party's over. And what about the people whose livelihoods depended on the baths? The vendors, masseurs, oil sellers, towel boys. Some shifted trades. Others joined religious communities. A few tried to open private spas, but without the infrastructure, few succeeded. Their economy had vanished with the heat. The ripple effects spread beyond bathing. With no public gathering space, cities lost a vital social glue. The baths weren't just about hygiene. They were newsrooms, clinics, marketplaces, dating pools, and cultural centers. Without them, urban life frayed at the seams. And yet, traces endured. In some towns, people continued to bathe in natural springs. The idea of water as therapy never vanished, it merely migrated. Medieval monastic communities built modest baths for health. Arabic scholars preserved Roman texts on bathing. Renaissance architects studied the ruins and dreamed of revival. One could argue that the Roman bath never truly died, it just went underground, dormant, waiting. You step once more into the ghost of a caldarium. The tiles are faded, but the design remains. A niche in the wall still cradles a headless statue. A worn groove in the marble floor suggests centuries of footsteps all gone now. And yet, if you listen closely, the past isn't silent. A splash remembered, a whispered joke, the rustle of linen. These echoes are the final currency of an economy built on warmth, scent, and care. As the sun sets through the open roof, you take one last breath of the cool, dry air. No oil today, no steam, just memory. Let's ease our way out gently now, with one final moment of quiet. And now, as the fires fade and the marble cools, you feel the hush that comes only at the end of something grand. The Roman baths, those shimmering palaces of comfort, were more than tiled rooms with warm water. They were breathing worlds built of labor, luxury, whispers, and heat. A place where emperors and apprentices, philosophers and perfumers all shared the same steam. As you lie still now, picture the final glow of lanterns reflecting off wet stone, the delicate clink of oil jars being packed away, the gentle rustle of linen as tired feet slip back into sandals. The scent of myrtle lingers faintly in the air, a whisper from a time when even the act of getting clean was an artful ritual. Let your breathing match the rhythm of dripping water, each drop marking time, softening thought, untangling tension. There's no rush now, no appointments, just the ancient stillness wrapping around you like the warmest towel. Somewhere, a memory stirs a smiling attendant, a flickering brazier, the soft cadence of Latin poetry read aloud beside a heated pool. You weren't there, not really. But in dreams, we all pass through marble halls. So rest, dear traveler. The bath is over, but its warmth lingers in you. Close your eyes. Let history dissolve into quiet. And when you open them again, ask yourself this: what rituals will people in the future uncover about us? What will they see in our daily routines, our obsessions, our need to be seen? History always leaves behind traces, not just in marble, but in the habits we think are invisible. If you found this journey through steam and time worth soaking in, don't forget to like, share, or comment below. Tell me, which part of the Roman bath surprised you the most? And if you're curious about more hidden layers of ancient life, you know where to find me. Until next time, Stay curious, stay human.